And welcome. I hope it's not too late to say Happy New Year to you all. And we'll start our overview and scrutiny committee this evening. Apologies for absence. We've got Demalola from our side, and I'm really grateful for David for subbing for us. Anybody else? Lenny Williams, who's doing Ofsted training this evening.
Councillor Hammond show's running a little bit late. He was stuck in traffic. So.
Right, so record of the last meeting. I checked the minutes, I hope you have too. And I think I'm able to sign them unless anyone's noticed something I haven't. Thank you so much. And then we're on to already item 3, urgent matters arising. None, that's good. I think we might have a lot of these tonight, DPIs. I know David has mentioned he is on the governing body at Abbey Court. Are there any more? I'm going to go round the room this way. Thank you. George. Oh, sorry, I missed Mark. Apologies. Lovely shirt.
I knew Joe was going to say that.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to declare that I'm a governor at both Cuxton School and also Parkwood School.
George?
Thank you, Chair. I am a member of both the Beyond Schools Trust and the Inspire Partnership Academy Trust. Following advice from the monitoring officer, I am declaring this interest at the start of the meeting, and I will stay in the room in the meeting all while the discussion remains broad and about Medway generally. Any discussions that become more specific about the relevant school/trusts I have just mentioned will then result in me needing to leave the room. Thank you.
Is it possible, so we're official, everybody does a George and reads it out officially, please? Thank you.
Could they just echo the preamble that George stated?
Liz?
Sorry, I'm daydreaming. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest. I'm a member of the Fortis Trust, but like George, I will remain in the room while the discussions are broad, but should anything come more specific to Fortis Trust, then I'll leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Hi, Sharon. Could you use your mic, Gorgia?
Yeah.
I'm on the governing body of St. Mary's Catholic Primary School in Gillingham, and like everyone else has said, as long as the discussions are broad, I'll stay. But if it discusses the individual school, I will leave.
It's so exciting to see our young people, but we're on to Leanna next. So welcome 3 people of the youth of Medway. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. I'm working. There we go. Hello, I'm a head teacher at Thamesview Primary School, which is part of the Howard Academy Trust, and I am also part of the governing body at Fort Pitt, which is part of the Beyond Trust. So similarly to my colleagues, I will stay while the conversation is broad, and then should it become more specific, I'm happy to leave.
Thank you. Lovely, Paula.
Thank you, Jo. Just that I'm on the Mass School and the Rochester School for Girls charitable trusts.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yep.
Yeah, just
David.
to repeat the form of words again, I am a governor at Abbey Court School. If the discussion is broad, I will remain, but if the subject is more specific, I will leave the room.
Douglas, we were just doing DPIs. Are you a school governor at all?
No, I'm not.
Thanks, Douglas. Meeting theme this evening is about education, and we're lucky to have our education experts here, Rebecca Smith and Celia, who will introduce the report, and if there's anything that you wish to add, we'll open up for debate afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, and I suggest we keep the conversation general, otherwise we'll have nobody left in the room. But it is really good to see that you are out there supporting our schools and providing that governance, which is a really valuable role. So you have tonight the annual schools performance report. If you'll recall, this is unvalidated data because we don't get validated data till March, and we don't want to leave it that long before we look at the overview of data. There are a couple of bits missing around Key Stage 5, and that's because they have not yet been published. The report goes through the outcomes of our children and young people for the academic year 23 to 24, so the exam series that were taken through that year and the suspensions and exclusions. In terms of our inspection judgments, 93.3% of our primary schools are good and outstanding, 83.3% of our secondary schools are good and outstanding, and 100% of our PRUs and special schools are good and outstanding. Pleasingly, we have seen improvements in the overall outcomes across phonics, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4. Whilst we've seen improvements, we still sit below or in line with the national for most. So it's a promising start, improvements on last year, but still more to do to bring us in line with national. And the picture isn't so great for our learners with SEND and some of our more vulnerable learners, where we have seen those outcomes fall down. We've also seen a slight decline in our outcomes in our early years provision. At our suspensions and exclusions, our permanent exclusion rate has increased in our secondary schools and is higher than the national average, and our suspension rates across all of our schools are higher than the national average. But on the reverse of that, our suspension rates for children with SEN support and EHCPs are below their peer group nationally. Thank you for those who attended the data workshop on Monday to understand what the report says, and I welcome questions, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Any takers? Lovely. Sharon, Robbie and Adrian in that order, please.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, it's
lovely to see all them green little spots. But obviously I just want to home in on the red ones and for the early learning. Do we have an idea why we deteriorated last year? Have we got any ideas why that happened? And I suppose while we're on that, if you've got any ideas on the special needs as well.
Thank you. Just to respond to the early years question, the analysis that each school will take will obviously now start to begin because we've just had the validated data. As a global perspective, I can't pinpoint any specific reason as to why that drop has happened. As we've reported, had been above national for a number of years. However, it's only a slight reduction, so it doesn't cause significant concern, but it will be down to the analysis of each setting, which we will continue to maintain an overview of.
Okay. Robbie?
Sorry,
I jumped the gun.
Sorry, I was just going to answer the SEN question. I again, without having done the real detailed analysis, we can't say for definite, but I suspect that the challenges that we've got around SEND in the broader sense, in terms of placements, accessibility to provision in schools, has had an impact on those outcomes.
Thank you.
Robbie?
Thank you, Chair. The Council will be aware that I have many times raised my worries about the changes of Medway did to the provision for special needs pupils in Medway schools following the pressures put upon them by the so-called safety valve. And I was assured that when those changes were embedded, we wouldn't see reflected a decrease in attainment of SEND children. And I was told to be patient and wait and see. Well, we've now waited and seen, and we've seen a decrease in attainment. So my question is, to what extent is the decrease in attainment for SEND children a direct result to the changes that Medway made away from their historic and very generous SEND support provision, which granted was never truly funded, and reflects the unfortunate changes that have taken place that we now continue to follow?
Thank you, and thank you for your question. And as I say, definitely the pressures on SEND as a system do have an impact on the results coming through. In terms of the safety valve specifically, we've only seen improvements in terms of the number of children with their EHCPs, the funding that is going into schools, the increased level of service. But we can't make a direct correlation yet with that to the outcomes that are coming through.
So are you saying that under the safety valve measures, that the proportion of funding that have gone to schools to assist special needs children has net increased?
Yes.
Not net decreased?
Yes.
Okay. Because my understanding was that essentially the barrier for entry to gain access to the top-up funding was elevated, that more children would be required EHCPs to access support that was previously given to children that weren't required to evidence through EHCP, and that essentially children were then thrust upon a waiting list of many years waiting for an assessment in order to access the support they were previously provided. So I'm interested in your answer, essentially.
So we are giving increasing support in terms of funding to schools. So we were topping up the SEND notional budget for the first year. We then moved that to graduated support funding and whole school funding, which already this academic year is over £500,000. We've invested 1.1 million in inclusion services. So those services that do outreach and support for schools are funded. 70 out of our 100 schools have engaged in trauma-informed practice training. We've got some schools piloting nurture provisions. We've got a number of outreach services, including ones for children and young people with mental health or physical health needs that are struggling to attend to school. Our attendance has gone up. So we have seen a significant improvement. Where we struggle is the capacity of our mainstream schools to cater for children with EHCPs, where we still remain well below the national, and we have nearly 50% of our children with EHCPs in special schools. But in terms of the resource that goes into our mainstream schools, that's gone up. In terms of the resource that goes into our special schools, in terms of a net funding, that's gone up quite significantly, actually, in terms of the amount of money that they were getting pre to the amount that they're getting now. So the safety valve is a financial management programme to ensure that we are working to release that deficit. But actually what we've done by putting that earlier intervention in is to enable that resource to go in earlier than it was previously.
And by SEND top-up funding being graduated into the whole school funding, which is what you said, so essentially the top-up funding that individual students would attract, you've now moved that into whole school funding, so the net figure you say has gone up. But is that still ring-fenced to SEND support? Can the school be more flexible in how they spend that funding? For example, funding assistants to teach all children extra support as opposed to just SEND? And may that not be reflected in the reduction in attainment?
So graduated support funding is pupil level funding. It's for the pupil. Whole school support funding is where a school puts on a programme that caters for more than one child, like developing nurture provision, etc. So there's still individual pupil funding that's graduated support funding.
I'm mindful of everyone else's time, Chair, so I don't want to get into a protracted question session and respect for everyone else's time, but I just generally am, I was assured that these changes would not see a reduction in attainment with SEND children. I was worried about it, I warned about it, and I'm not certain, but I remain worried that we're now beginning to see the impact of these changes, and I don't see with the new Labour government any huge amounts of additional funding going into SEND that might alleviate my concerns.
If I can just come back, Robbie, I know we've had lots of conversations and there's been quite a few changes even in the last 12 months, so I'm going to suggest that you and I meet separately outside of this and I can update you on those changes and show you the data that sits behind what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about central government funding, I'm talking about our high needs block funding and how much of that we are giving out to schools in relation to the SEND support that has increased.
And as Chair, I'd just like to add, Mariah and her team did a lovely funding meeting for us when we were looking carefully at SEND with the help of Children's Forum as well, Parent Forum, which I think you were helping Trump with his election. She may have missed that, but you can catch it up on YouTube. Leanna and Liz.
Hello. So I just wanted to come back on a couple of points, if that's all right. The first one is about the drop in early years data. Now, from experience from my own trust and speaking to other head teacher colleagues, I think that there's a significant issue around the early years cohort that came in this year because they were the kind of babies of COVID. And what we are seeing is that basic fine motor skills and skills that we would see develop at that age have not developed, whether that's because obviously they were isolated, they weren't being mixed, they weren't necessarily going to nurseries or going to schools. But what we're seeing is that's having a massive impact, not just on things like the fine motor skills, but then their ability obviously to hold a pencil. Or, and I think that's quite extensive. And similarly with communication, because obviously GLD covers every area, even kind of the socialising, the communication and understanding of the physical world and things like that. And obviously, that they missed a lot of their kind of initial socialisation. So for me, that I mean, obviously, I talk from people I've spoken to, but I think personally, I think that probably accounts a little bit for the GLG drop for this specific cohort. And certainly, you know, you would expect that to go back up. But I think these were quite a vulnerable group of younger children who were influenced and in their very early years when that, you know, the socialisation was broken. And the second point I was just going to come back to, regarding the SEN and the mainstream, obviously, I mean, I know because I've spoken to Celia, and I mean, I'm a big fan of the banding model and the approach that's being taken, and I think banding offers massive security to the children that need the funding, as opposed to continual applications for top-up funding. However, what I will say is, I know of many schools where we're still getting quite delayed with the funding, and I think that is quite a concern because you know, as I said, I'm a small representative, but certainly there is still delays for us in terms of receiving fundings and systems going through. And I know there is a huge amount of work going into that, but certainly that can ultimately obviously have a knock-on in terms of progress and attainment.
Thank you for that. That's very truthful and honest. Appreciated. Liz, before you, can I pick up with Adrian? Because I think being gender biased, I might have missed him. I apologise.
Thank you, Jo, but I wouldn't have been too upset to wait. First of all, can I say to officers how good the data workshop was on Tuesday evening. I found that extremely useful, and so thank you very, very much. Like colleagues just mentioned, I'm quite concerned about the early years deterioration, and I'm pleased our head colleague there was, because I was wondering, is this because of the COVID cohort? What worries me now is, and I think we've got to keep a very close eye on this, because of the, you know, there's a lot of documentary evidence there is, so what happens in early years has a significant effect on people all the way through their lives, you know, the Oasis thing. And what worries me is that if we don't do something extra with this cohort, are we going to find that this drop is going to just go up the key stages, all the way up to the exam results? And I think we've got to grab this one, and if we don't, that cohort are going to have a real struggle, and you know that's not fair on them. It's bad enough having having the COVID bit, but this could carry on, and I think we, you know, certainly if we get the same effect in a year's time, we have got to grab this one, because if we don't grab it, we will have failed all those young people, and we just cannot do that. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about is the increase in the permanent exclusions, which is also mirrored by the growth in suspensions. I mean, the graph went nicely down, and now we're back up again to a worse situation than we were before. And again, I think this is something perhaps we've got to you know, get to grips with. You know, and one of the problems of, you know, with exclusions is that certainly when I was chairing the Community Safety Partnership, in the areas where the schools got a high level of exclusions, there was a significant increase in antisocial behaviour. You know, those figures are there, if you want to go back a few years, are there to see. So, you know, and again, if children aren't in school, their life chances are decreasing rapidly. So those are some areas I think we've got to put some significant effort in. But I'd just like to say again how well all that data is presented. It's, you know, there's a huge amount of information in there, and I was quite intrigued to find out how Nigerian dialects are now increasing so much as being the second or third most common language spoken in Medway. So that was, and I believe that has got a lot to do with the recruitment activities of Medway Hospital. But so yeah, lots of data. I think it's well done. You know, I think if we keep having these data workshops, it will really help members. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just say for our lovely young people here this evening, Adrian mentioned ACEs. There are adverse childhood experiences. We try to not use acronyms or jargon, but just so that you know, maybe you did know, I'm just making sure you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very pertinent points. Absolutely, we need to keep an eye on our early years and how that's progressing through, because that is the foundation learning stage. That is what sets the foundations for the rest of our young people's careers and learning. And our exclusions and suspensions, I absolutely agree with you. That's not a good trend. What I would say is that, a number of people sat around and said they're on the governing bodies of trusts, they're on the governing bodies of schools. These are the sorts of questions that you as members and councillors can have with your schools, just to ask why the increase and actually ask for your own school's data. Certainly, and with the new things that are being suggested within the Children's Welfare and Schools Bill coming in, councils are going to have more of a statutory responsibility around education performance. They're going to have a bit more accountability, and we don't know yet, but we hope with that accountability will come the ability to ask questions of academy trusts, which at the moment we don't have any powers over. As you know, we don't run schools, academy trusts run schools. But maybe next year we can have some CEOs sat here presenting the data, because they will be able to answer the questions more appropriately for you. Yeah.
Thank you. And next we've got Liz, Lisa and Douglas.
Thanks, Jo. I had a couple of points. I was going to pick up on the early years as well, without sort of going on and on about it. And I appreciate the comments were made, and that makes sense with regards to COVID. I think my only concern is it's Medway that's declined and national picture hasn't. It's actually improved for early years. So as much as I can appreciate COVID has impacted children, if it hasn't nationally, what's happening in Medway that's different, and also obviously mapping those young people going through school, we need, like we said, we need to keep an eye on, but also for future year groups coming in, we need to see whether that's a continuation of a decline, And I notice, I think the figures are actually still very similar to national figures, so it's not like we're doing a lot worse than national, it's actually very similar, but it's just that, if we were obviously doing better, and if we just don't want to see that keep slipping. So that's my first sort of question. And then second, on sort of all the data that we've got in here, which is really great, and seeing it all broken down, I guess I always just want to know sort of the point of the data and what we do with it. Because, where we look at all the measures, I can see sort of, for example, white children are in the bottom half of every single measure, right from phonics to Key Stage 2 reading to Key Stage 4 results. They only appear in the top half when we get to suspensions and absences. So it's really sort of quite worrying data. But I don't know whether it's just because obviously they're 85% of the population. So is that how it's? I'm just trying to work out in my head if that's the reason. And also just what do we actually do with that data? If we're going to take the data, what do we do with it? Because I appreciate if you're going to sort of focus on a particular group, that's not going to be that helpful, because if 85% of your class is white, how do you focus on that, on the majority, Thank you.
Thank you. If I can just respond on a couple of those points. I'll work backwards from your comments and questions. First of all, the annual schools report goes to head teachers and is already been referenced in some of the presentations that we regularly give to the head teachers forums to break down the data and ensure that they have that narrative that is provided within this report, but also in greater detail for them too. Celia mentioned about the importance of governing bodies being able to analyse and ask those key questions in their own context within the schools and the trusts that they're working within. Part of that is that I've been giving presentations to governor forums with some of these headlines already, so encouraging those kind of questions and the analysis to go on there. But as you rightly said, in terms of personalising that data to their individual classes and then breaking that down to the individual cohorts or children in the classes, the essential work that of course our school leaders do really well with their pupil progress meetings, with their analyses per subject or per phase. But this report goes a long way to being able to give them the headlines as a starting point and some of the challenge for those different groups. If I can just pick up on a point that we've mentioned and a few questions around early years, one of the things I omitted to say initially was that there's been a transition focus because we've had feedback from both head teachers in receiving obviously young children from private voluntary and independent childminders or other nursery settings, and talking about the importance of planning proactively for their smooth transition, so to make sure that they're school ready. And our early years SEND officers, the team of professionals that support that transition and the work that the PVI and the nurseries do to transition those children into settings has been very much stepped up in response to the feedback both from schools and the comments that have come from those independent and private and voluntary organisations. So that work will be ongoing, and you rightly say, and I welcome your comment around the disparity between previous outcomes from early years, and the gap isn't particularly wide, but we are mindful and we are watching that. Thank you.
Can I just add on to that, Councillor Tracy Coombs, our portfolio holder, and Councillor Adam Price, the portfolio head for Children's, are absolutely on this agenda. We are working with our head teacher colleagues to pull a symposium together on education. That's going to be at the beginning of March. I think it's the 3rd of March off the top of my head, to have those conversations with head teachers around the system and what system changes need to be made and how the system changes to improve outcomes. Outcomes is absolutely a driving priority for this council. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, my question was really around the suspension rates like we were talking about earlier on. Thinking about actually where the correlation of the higher suspension rates are and the relation to the SEND, because if you look at the SEND rates, that's higher, and then obviously as someone was saying earlier on about the attainment of those SEND children, so are we able to analyse and correlate where that is and whether actually that relates to the those being suspended?
Yeah, so actually the suspension rates and exclusion rates for children with SENK and EHCPs is lower than their peer group nationally. We're actually quite good at not suspending and excluding our children with SEND and working on alternatives. We are high across the board, and absolutely we do need to address that. There is in the back of the booklet the suspension and exclusion rates for every school in Medway, so you can start to see where some of the challenges are. And what we will be doing is having individual conversations with those schools and looking at how we support the performance in those particular schools.
Celia, could I just come in there, or I don't know if it's Rebecca, because that table was really useful, and I just wondered how you were supporting good practice, because there are a number of brilliant schools that have zero, and also, you know, how are you sort of delivering the message that the behaviour is the behaviour, the child is not the problem is the behaviour. So therefore, you know, if you are adhering to the SEND Code of Practice, your school and your educational establishment needs to be as inclusive as possible. And, you know, what message exclusions give to children, you know, like they're not wanted, and as Adrian's already said, what are they doing when they're not at school? And, you know, are we confident that always reintegration meetings happen and that there is a fresh start, and that the mud doesn't stick, really?
Thank you. So, as Rebecca said, we share this data with schools. Secondary schools actually have a dashboard which is much more real-time data. Primary schools have asked us to prepare one for them. So, through MELA, which is the Medway Education Leadership Association, which is the head teachers of primary schools and their zone meetings, and through MSHA, which is the Medway Education Secondary head teachers. That's where these conversations happen, where they have everybody's data. They can identify which schools have got some really good practice to share and talk about what's happening. We obviously have a statutory duty to get involved when a permanent exclusion happens and when there are high exclusion rates, and we support schools and parents with that process, because I haven't met a head teacher who thinks exclusions or suspensions is a good idea. And I don't think we ever will. I think we all recognise, everybody recognises the impact that that has on a young person. And it's not the physical act of suspension, and the exclusion, it's the trauma that it causes. But as you know, we are rolling out trauma-informed practice across all of our schools. 70 out of the 100 schools have had that training or are in the process of having it. And we have funded that for all schools in Medway to understand that. But I can sit here and say that I have not come across a school who doesn't understand the impact that a suspension has, and it is always the last resort for our schools when it comes to young people's behaviour.
Thank you. David, you're next.
Thank you. I just want to go to page 52, and that's the area that's children in care. So obviously, as a council, we've committed to treating care experience as a protected characteristic. This is obviously the issues with the statistics is it's a low base, but there is a marked difference in the performance of children in care in Medway versus the national average. So I just wanted to see whether, obviously, with that renewed focus for making sure that we're advocating for those with care experience, what measures we are undertaking to make sure that we can bridge that gap.
So absolutely, we do have significant differences in our outcomes for care experienced young people. The virtual school is doing much more robust tracking of that, and we are looking at how we improve those outcomes with the use of the pupil premium funding, the additional coaching and training for our young people who are within our care. We are looking at how that is impacted across the schools where they're attending a school in Medway and where they're attending elsewhere, where we perhaps have a more distant relationship with the school because of the distance that it is. So it is absolutely a focus. It's a focus of the Corporate Parenting Board, it's a focus of the Virtual School Partnership Board, and there is a subgroup of that partnership board that is looking specifically at outcomes for those young people.
Okay, thank you. I've got a list of people next. We've got Leah, then Sharon, George, and finally Douglas.
So I had a fair few bits, but the first was, given that we are below average, below national for SEN attainment in many of the measures, had quite a few parents contact with regards to specialist provision and a lack of place in there. So I wondered how far along we are with the new provision at Cornwallis and when we'll expect that to have places available, and what type of places as well. And then we were also massively above national on speech and language referrals, but I couldn't see anything in there that said why that might be the case. And then, oh, that's the question that David just took, which was about looked after children. But I had a caveat on that, which was whether we are liaising with other councils to look at best practice, like councils that are well above, whether we're looking at those. And then the last one was similar to Councillor Golvin about exclusions. But then it was more that we seem to be below national on suspensions, which is great, but then we're above on permanent. So I'm wondering if some of our schools are kind of jumping the gun and jumping straight to permanent. I don't know if you'd have info on that. But, okay, thanks.
Thank you. So in terms of that last one around permanent, obviously the statistics, our permanent exclusions are low, so one child increases our averages at a much greater rate than whereas you've got lots and lots of suspensions, which are shorter ones, which is why there's a disparity in the data. But we have had more permanent exclusions from secondary schools in the last academic year. For Cornwallis, we were very much at the behest of the DFE in terms of building the school. We are expecting it for September 2027. We have increased the provision at Inspire Academy, which is going to be moving to the Cornwallis site to 90. The new Cornwallis site will take 160, and that will be SEMH and ASD. And then your last question was about speech and language referrals. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just that we seem to have much, much higher, like 5% higher than national, and I wondered why.
But that's, the southeast has much higher.
Okay.
The national, in terms of, you mean in terms of referrals? Just
I'm not sure if it's referrals or just
what page
that
are you
is
looking at?
the
Sorry.
SEND needs. Bear with me. Page 29?
Yeah. Say that again.
Page 29.
It's in the little chart to the right.
It's referrals.
Oh, you've got it.
I've got it.
So it's not referrals, it's primary need, sorry. So their primary need is speech and language.
Yes, so we do, but that does reflect the southeast picture in terms of the young people coming through with that as listed as their primary need.
But we don't know why that would be so much higher than elsewhere, because it just seems odd. Like, what's special about the southeast?
I think it's a bigger issue than the council has. I think there's an NHS health issue in terms of the diagnosis and how people are getting them and going about that. So, yeah, there is quite a lot on why the southeast might be leading on those kind of diagnosis.
Is there any feeling that it might be something that is lacking in early years? Because that was the only thing I could think of, is that there's something that isn't being picked up before school.
I can understand the thread of that inquiry, but I think in Celia's response, I think there's a larger piece of work to be done there in terms of the correlation between referrals into a health service for a specific speech and language, either diagnosis or difficulty or delay, and it's broader than just those simple communication, speech and language minor delays that we're seeing in the beginning of the mentoring into reception and into early years. I'm using a very global sort of way of answering that, and I you could pin me down to the specifics, which I wouldn't be able to give you, but that's my kind of immediate answer.
Sharon. And sorry, can we just stop, Sharon, because we've got one of the young people, and I do take them first. And I hope it's Aisha. Is that right? Isha.
It's
oh
me
no,
this time.
Archie.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. I just wanted to ask on the reason for suspension. It said physical assault against a pupil is spiked like really suddenly, and we're higher than national now. I was just wondering if there's any particular reason for that, because like the highest one is persistent disruptive behaviour, which is like normally quite a big issue, like dealing with students in the classroom, completely understandable. But we're below national for that, but we're not for physical assault against another pupil. So I just wanted to wonder if there was any like reason for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Archie, and that's a very good question. And again, I would be speculating a little bit on this. The data that we get is what schools report to us. We did have, during last year, a couple of schools with quite a high level of disruption. That was reported in the press. And obviously that would have spiked a lot of those suspensions in relation to that. But it's really, you're right, normally persistent disruptive behaviour is the main exclusion or suspension reason, and that has gone up, and that's the only thing that we could pin it down to is those particularly large schools that had some challenges back just before last summer.
I'm going to take Mark next, if that's okay, because Sharon, you've spoken, and I think I ignored Mark because he had such a nice shirt on.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the questions on performance and that have been raised, so I just want to go through a few points to do. So one of the things that's quite surprising me is these free school meals. Between those that are eligible and those that are claiming, 24.2% eligible and 18.6% that are claiming. I just wondered if there's anything being done with schools to try and get that, because it also comes with a pupil premium, which at the moment every penny they can get in schools is helpful. I know some of this will be to do with free school meals in Key Stage 1, but are we making sure that everyone that's entitled, because there's funding that comes with that from government. My next point was to do with regard to SEN and EHCP numbers. So with Medway, we're slightly above national on SEN support, but below on EHCP. Would that potentially be changing where we've done so much work to eradicate our backlog on EHCPs? If you want to answer them too, I've got a few more questions. But
so I'm going to let Mariah answer the free school meal and claiming.
So you're absolutely correct. It is to do with the infant free school meals. So what schools have been doing, they've been encouraging parents to sign the application form even though they're entitled to the free school meal, and they have been trying to incentivise that with free PE kits, etc., because the more they sign up to that claim, they do get the pupil premium and the other funding associated. So yes, schools are well aware and are actively trying to encourage parents to sign up, but parents do have to sign that piece of paper.
So in terms of our SEN and EHCP numbers, you'll recall as part of the safety valve programme that Medway had more children with EHCPs than national and was growing at a greater rate than national. That was 3 years ago. We're actually now hot off the press data in line with national. We do expect, because we're doing all this work moving our EHCP throughs, we will have a little bit of a bulge coming through, and certainly our schools are feeling the pressure of those additional young people coming through, but we are actually moving those referrals through. Medway has always had a higher proportion of children on SEN-K. Now, SEN-K is where a school identifies a SEN need, but they don't have an EHCP, so that is down to the school to identify, and certainly Medway schools have always identified a higher proportion. In fact, that's dipped slightly because I think it was even more out of kilter with national in previous years. But our EHCP numbers are stabilised roughly in line with national, which is part of what we were trying to achieve with some of the safety valve work, because the intervention is getting in earlier so that there isn't the need to request EHCPs. And actually our request from parents for EHCPs has dropped by at least 50%.
Can I come back to you, because there's some people that haven't spoke yet, if that's all right. Thanks, Mark. Douglas, you haven't spoken, so if you could go next, please, and then Smither.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, the workshop was fantastic. Being able to ask questions of the data was so useful. As to that, I want to really start in trying to unpick what some of these data sets actually mean. I feel reassured that there's a dashboard that schools are getting in terms of making insights to the overall data that comes yearly. My first question is to do with the standardization of the explanations that schools will have to do to explain the dashboards. For example, if something is peaking as red, how does the school justify why they're in the red, amber, or green, for example? How good, how trustworthy, how do you validate their explanation as to why, say, for example, the absentee rate is X or Y and Z? Do you have a way of standardization across those explanations so that no school can have a biased way of reporting or explaining why they're underperforming? The second one was to do with the actual absentee rates and why they're up. Children need to be in school for them to receive the education. And we accept there's a blip due to COVID, for example, but the trajectory has been going up and is still high. Any justification or reason for that? And yeah, for me personally, I would like to have a bit more understanding of the narratives between each of the data sets. But then overall, it's very good. I like crunching data like this. Last very quick question. What do we mean when we talk about other ethnic groups opposed to, say, mixed? What constitutes other ethnic groups? Is it just and then mixed? Because sometimes there's a blurring. I've seen that in other reports in terms of how you categorize who constitutes as mixed or any other ethnic groups when you don't have a large array of ethnic groups captured in the first place.
Kelly's got hers on. Thank you. I'm going to start and then I'm going to pass over to Rebecca to talk in a bit more detail about absenteeism. So the standardisation across schools, the dashboard goes to schools and the head teachers have those conversations with each other in their network meetings. So they are holding each other to account, they're sharing good practice, they know what they are talking about and what they're doing, and actually they're very robust at that. I've seen that in action. In terms of our local authority schools, where we might be going in a more school improvement role, we have qualified, so Rebecca and myself are both qualified head teachers. We've done the job so that we know when we're challenging what we're giving back and whether that's accurate or not. And also, schools are held to account. We're not the only, but they are held to account by Ofsted. Their trusts to have the same mechanisms as well. And so it's not a case that they can, fabricate some of that data or tweak some of that data. They're quite robust mechanisms. Ofsted is a very robust mechanism in judging schools on their data and their outcomes. When it comes to things like attendance, the local authority has greater statutory duties. And I would just say the attendance data in here is the nationally published attendance data, so it is always very lagged. It can only be, sometimes it's up to 18 months because the whole data set is published, so it's really behind. We've made significant improvement in attendance, and actually our real-time attendance data, and Rebecca will be able to give us the figures, has shown significant improvements, and our attendance is looking a lot better now. And in terms of the other, I was just going to say, is it in the glossary? Because we take that's what schools have recorded children on their census returns as other in terms of the mixed ethnicity. So I would need to go back and look. Does it have in the glossary at the back? No, it doesn't. So I will have to go back and look at that and come back to you in terms of what the census guidance identifies as that.
Sure. Thank you. Very, very, very helpful. And just very quickly, to support head teachers, this is why I was asking about the standardization, because if we have quantitative or qualitative responses, how will you get a consistency as to spotting trends when people are explaining it, the rationale differently? They're adding great value, but it's always a different explanation as to, so you, at some point you need to go for a standardization of responses so that you can get that insights and it's a meaningful instruction for you to have intervention.
So I accept that, and absolutely. But what I would say is the school's dashboard, the head teachers came back and said we want a more contextualised narrative around it. So we've added things to it like the proportion of free school meals, the number of casual admissions during that year, the number of managed moves. So it's not just comparing the kind of raw attendance or attainment data. It does have the context of the challenges that the schools are dealing with alongside that narrative. I don't know if Rebecca just wants to give the attendance.
I do. I want to share some good news. So in terms of the attendance, as Celia is saying, I can say that within the last, I think it's about 10 days ago, we checked in with the most recent attendance data published by the Department for Education. And we've come a long way, both nationally and locally, on the attendance agenda, because from August this year, you'll be aware with Governor's responsibility hats on this evening, of the changes that have been brought in and the greater focus on working together to improve attendance, and the statutory responsibility that we have to work with all schools to make sure attendance policies are up to speed, there's a consistency, there's a drive there to support and make sure families are being supported rather than purely going solely down the penalty route or the legal route, which is still important, but actually what we're saying is support and better understanding what the reasons or the barriers are for attendance. So that being said, all schools are 100% on the agenda with us and very much committed to that. And I can say that our attendance is currently 93.5, our overall attendance. That's compared to 94.1. So that gap is very much closing, but it has improved significantly. You'll have heard Celia talk, for those of us that were together on the attendance workshop on Tuesday, the data workshop on Tuesday, about the unauthorised and the authorised attendance and the difference between that, and schools obviously when they have their attendance data and they have an overall absence figure, we encourage governors, schools are needing to break that down into thinking about whose absence are they authorising and where are they challenging. So that's a good question for governors to be asking, to break that down, because in Medway our overall absence, obviously conversely because of the attendance data, is 6.5 compared to the national of 5.9. So we're still higher in that overall absence data, but there's more work to be done there, but it has improved. The persistent absence for children, again, there's been an improvement there, but there is still quite a lot of work for schools to be doing and for us to be supporting the schools, because we are 19.2% of our children have a persistent absence rate compared to the national of 17.1. So that's where that distance starts to widen, and we know there's more to be achieved. Then we look finally at the severe absence figure, where there's 50% of a child's attendance is seen obviously as an absence and is seen as a significant concern. We are 2.2% of children in Medway compared to 1.9% nationally. So whilst we've got some good strides ahead for our overall attendance, there is still more work to be done, particularly in the persistent absence.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Smither, then Wayne, because they haven't spoken. We're running out of time. So if you think you can get your question to Celia or Rebecca at a different stage and you've already spoken this evening, please let me know so I can take you off the list.
Thanks, Jo. So I've sat Can people hear me? Yeah. So I've sat through a few of these reports now, and normally I would kind of really do a deep dive into each number and kind of say, why is that number high and low? But I'm reflecting a little bit more about kind of looking beyond the data. I mean, I don't envy you your job, really, to put all this together, to collate it, and then answer all of these kind of probing questions. And there's so much of this that's beyond your control, so many factors. You know, we've talked about that already, funding restraints, COVID still looming large over the whole landscape. And there's so much of this, so we're asking you, come on, what are you doing about this? How do we get this better? But obviously you can only work within your constraints. But I think for me, it's about being really radically ambitious for our young people and children, like really being quite radical about that. And a few of these times I've looked at the same kind of numbers, and it's the same red flags. We're lagging behind the national average. But even with the national average, I think, I mean, we just seem to be playing catching up. We're just chasing this thing, you know, rather than getting ahead of it. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think you have an easy answer. But what I'm asking for is, are there examples where you're kind of just going beyond, this is the national average, I'm going to run and catch up to it, and to just think, I'm just really going to be ambitious, do something different? I don't know what the answer is, but I just want assurance that, you know, we are not just looking at maybe not a very high bar and then just thinking that's where we just keep aiming for.
Thank you. So absolutely, the system needs to be ambitious. And you're right, it's no one party's job, it's no one part of that system. The whole education system leadership needs to be ambitious. And that's what we're hoping to have that conversation at the Education Symposium in March, to actually have leaders, head teachers, CEOs together to say, right, come on, exactly what you've said. In fact, I might invite you to come and speak to them, to open it, to say, because that is what we're doing. We're saying, come on, we all need to think differently, because we're going to have to change something really radically to get a different outcome than we're getting. And what is it that we need to change as a system on how we support our young people?
Wayne?
Thank you, Jo. Firstly, thanks for the presentation on Tuesday evening. But I'm reading this document, and across the whole of the average point scores, Medway just seems to be below the national average, and really following pretty much what Smitha was saying. We are playing catch up. What is it we're doing? Why are we not doing it quick enough? Because I do really feel that we are letting our youngsters down by having to play catch up constantly. And so the real question is, what are we going to do to improve it?
So I think I refer you back to my previous answer to Smitha. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are just really out of time, and I did ask people to indicate if, you know, they had questions that couldn't be answered outside this meeting. And the only one that wants a question is Robbie, apparently. Is that right? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. It's just very quick. It's just about IDACI measures. It's amazing, Medway, the range of IDACI that our schools tracked. I mean, the developmental gap that you have to get your head around is just extraordinary. My question is very specific. When you examine the IDACI, which looks at deprivation and other different things, do you find outliers that seem to, like, you know, attract a lot but then outperform massively? And do you examine what they do differently to examine best practice?
So that is part of the conversations that schools have when they have this data, to look at where the good practice is and to pick that out. We do our own categorisation of schools. Rebecca might talk about where we look at it for individual schools and highlight where there's areas of strength and areas where we might want to look at support. I mean, you're right, we have a range of schools with a range of different intakes. Some are extremely challenging in terms of the level of deprivation that they are dealing with. But I also push, you know, we've got a lot of trusts in Medway. You sit on trusts, some of which have schools that are outside of Medway. There are other parts of the country and other parts of even the wider sort of Kent and Medway landscape that are dealing with even more issues and more challenges, and there are some examples where things can improve. So this whole conversation about sharing good practice, etc. The regions group, the Department for Education has that responsibility for school improvement in academies. You, as governors on those boards, have the responsibility for outcomes in those trusts. We are 80%, academy trusts within Medway. So depending on what comes out of the changes to central government, to how much levers we as a local authority will have. But we have a statutory duty, you have a statutory duty, we have a statutory duty, members have a statutory duty around promoting educational excellence and ensuring that. So that's why we're having that conversation about the broader partnership. That's why we'd like to support some conversations that you can have with schools and trusts about an accountability framework, about what do we agree is a mechanism by which we can have that high challenge, high trust relationship in terms of improving our outcomes for young people.
Thank you so much. And, we have got some big wins here. Attendance is a big win. Performance factor, the percentage attainment score 8. So can we just send a little memo round to schools thanking them for what they're doing? Because obviously post-COVID there are differences being made. And I've got just some follow-up questions which I'll send to both you and Rebecca, because I'm not sure which one they're going to be for. We're going to have a 5-minute comfort break because somebody asked me for one, if that's okay. Thank you, but it's just 5 minutes. Sorry, before we do that, can I go to my vice chair? I'm just such a pleaser. So sparkly.
So I move that the committee notes the annual schools performance report and that we send schools a memo on the points that they're doing well on. Was there something else you said you were going to do, Celia, about working with National, to Smith's question, but I didn't catch what that was? That's fine. Then I move that we note the annual schools performance report.
And is that seconded? Thanks, Mark, and thank you, that's agreed, yes? Great, thanks. 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to have our first secure school, not only in the country, but it's here in Medway, and it's the first one in the country. So can I welcome the lovely Claire Wilson and Steve Chalk, who are going to do a short presentation, then we can open up the debate. Thank you, guys.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve. This is Claire, obviously. I'm going to do the first couple of minutes, hand over to Claire, back again, and then we can talk together. Oasis Restore, secure future for young people. Oasis Restore is built, of course, where the old STC was in Medway, and you shouldn't mistake one for the other just because they're on the same site. I know that one or two of you have been able to come up to Restore. We are welcoming people to come and see what's going on, because this is on your doorstep, it's in the middle of your community, and once you see something, you know something more about it. Although it's on the same site, a huge amount of money has been spent on it, not for the sake of spending money, but to make it therapeutic. It is the country's first secure school, as you've just heard. The law had to be changed to allow a not-for-profit, a charity, to be able to run a custodial establishment. But that's not the only change. The change is that, as the name gives away, Oasis Restore is about restoration. It's not about punishment. It's not just trauma-informed. All of its practices and its environment are built around the concept and the principle of healing rather than trauma, of therapy rather than trauma. So, if you were to come, you were to see that we don't have wings anymore. There were wings. We have student flats. If you would come, you'd see that there are no cells anymore. There are bedrooms. Before we opened, I spent a night sleeping in one of the bedrooms because I figured if I couldn't get sleep on the bed and didn't enjoy being in the room, why should anybody else have to endure it? So that's what we are. We take young people age 12 up to 18 from the courts. The courts decide who we take, who comes to us. We work with them. Every child or young person who's with us has committed violent crime. Some are on remand, some have been convicted, but our job is to work with them. And echoing in the last statement now everything that you said in that really interesting debate around education here, echoing that, every young person who's with us has been traumatized. Each one of them has been exploited. Each one of them has been punished in all sorts of ways by society. Each one of them has been unlucky. And as you know, what we do with children who are unlucky, who are born in the wrong place, into the wrong environment, or a hostile environment, is what we normally do is we punish them for their beginning. What we are doing is providing healing and help. There's lots more to say, but we'll leave that for questions. Over to Claire.
Thanks. So if I just quickly explain that we are a dual registered secure children's home and an academy trust, and that's one of the new things that the policy allowed us to do. So we're regulated by Ofsted. We are inspected and regulated by them under the secure children's home, under the social care common inspection framework, and also as a 16 to 19 academy. So the FES framework, the Further Education and Skills framework, also applies to us. As an education, integrated health care and education establishment, we also have our healthcare partner who are commissioned by National Health and Central North West London Trust, who are working with us. And all that we do on site is integrated, from the leadership right the way down to a therapist and a school nurse being based on each of the flats for the children where we are. The placing authority is the youth custody service, and it works with us as it does with any other custody place in how they refer children to us. So we liaise with the YCS when they get a referral, and then we discuss if we feel that we can adequately care for that child and do so safely. Sorry, thank you. There are 46 beds. At the moment, we're only registered, because of 2 buildings being registered, we're only registered for up to 22, and we're hoping to increase that later this year as we recruit further. Refusals for us work the same as any other secure children's home, so we can refuse on the grounds of safety or safeguarding risk. Again, that is all around assessment of the child and how well we can care for them. As when this was sent, which was about the 19th of December, this has increased a little bit since Christmas. We've had 22 placements to date, so that includes children leaving and arriving. And as you can see here, 60% of remand, which currently it mirrors the national, so that's to be expected. 68% black or mixed heritage and 86% from London and the South East, as would be expected. Most of the children referred to us will come from that region. We've got currently 145 staff. Majority of those are staff that are working with children day to day on the floor. They're called Restore practitioners. Each of those have received a 12-week trauma-informed training programme and are undertaking a level 4 training programme with Mulberry Bush Residential School, who specialise in therapeutic care for adolescents. So they've worked with us to create a level 4 training programme over 2 years to support them in understanding, so that we seek to see that all behaviour is communication and empowering staff to de-escalate, look beyond the child's behaviour, understand what's going on and deal with the root cause of it. They're further supported by basically an in-house CAMS service from Central North West London, which is 28 full-time equivalent of staff there, ranging from speech and language therapists right the way through to clinical psychologists and the like. So it's incredibly dynamic and really holistic care of children that goes on a day-to-day basis. Just in the interest of time, if I quickly rattle through to this and then pass back to Steve. So as you can see on the screen is an example of a day in the life of a child in the school. At the moment we have 14 hours out of a room. We only lock the room when the child is put into bed and is ready to settle for the night, as you would expect in any other children's home. This is an example of the kind of offer that we have. We offer English and maths, and we offer an option of 2 vocational pathways for each child that they choose. The child arrives, they have an assessment and induction programme which lasts up to 2 weeks. So we do baseline assessments with them, work with them, discuss what their interests, what their skills are, what they care about, and then we work with them to build their timetable up. There is a really comprehensive enrichment programme that then runs after school, and visits for all professionals and families runs from up until 8 o'clock each evening and at the weekend as well. Engagement from family and parents in particular has been really positive, and they've been speaking very highly of how well the children feel cared for and noticing that they are expressing they feel safe with us, which is incredibly positive, so we're really proud of that already. The kind of food offering and everything is really based on what we know from schools and thinking about what works well in residential and SEMH provision as well, and so that's a key kind of component of what we do on a day-to-day basis. We have all qualified teachers that work with us. They are a group of 16 of them. We have got a head of literacy, head of numeracy, head of enrichment, head of vocational pathways, and English, maths teachers, and then vocational subject specialist teachers. And we have a SENCO, head of inclusion, and are working with our Central North West London Trust on support for children that come to us who don't have EHCPs. As an academy, unfortunately, because of DfE policy, we're not allowed to put EHCPs in place for children when they're with us, but we're working to get everything ready so that when they do leave, go home to local authority, we've got everything ready for them to be able to access that support when they leave, if that's available to them. Again, much like Steve, there's so much to say around this, but I'll hand it on.
Lastly, one of the huge revolutions in all of this is that because this was formed under the Academies Act, in actual fact, that Oasis was asked to set up a secure Academies Trust. So it's just like an ordinary Academies Trust, but it's set up just to run this institution. And the revolution in that is it means that we are our own governing body. We are not run by the MOJ, we're not run by the YCS, we govern ourselves. And we...
Can you just do those acronyms for our young people, please, Steve?
Okay. The MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, the YCS is the Youth Custodial Services, which is part of the Ministry of Justice, And Feltham and Cookham Wood, when it was open, and Oasis, etc., they are all youth jails, and they are run by the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice gave Oasis responsibility for running this establishment, so we have our own governing body, just as any schools trust here has its own board and its own governing body. That's the huge difference. That means that we can steer our own ship. The strapline for Oasis Restore is a secure future for young lives. When we set it up to begin with, I came up with the name Oasis Restore, and I wanted the strapline to be setting young people free. Because that's actually what we're doing. That was watered down by the Ministry of Justice, but it amounts to the same thing. We are not punishing young people, we are setting them free. Last statement, last year, 82.9% of young people leaving a custodial establishment, such as Feltham, were reconvicted within 12 months. 82.9% of young people in a custodial establishment were reconvicted within 12 months. Those are the latest figures. That's why we are not about punishment. That's why we're about setting young people free, because not only do we want them to be in a position where they do not reoffend, but they live healthy lives, really free lives. That's our goal.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping to time, and thank you both. And I've got some questions already, questioners already, so I'll write the rest of you down if you just keep your hands up. We'll start with Wayne, then Leah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Claire. Most of what you've rated already is probably the points that I wanted to raise with you. But before I do anything, I would actually welcome the opportunity to come and visit you as well. If you want to extend that to me, I'll discuss that with you. As I understand, and I've read quite a lot about the school and about Oasis itself, and there's a few points that I want to raise. So my understanding is that it's essentially an evangelical group who are adopting a revolutionary approach to delivering justice. And what you've just narrated seems to suggest that. This method is tried and tested in adult prisons, in the open ones, and it's had mixed results. And as I say, this isn't a prison, it's a school. It's a restitutional school as such. I understand that there's a learning support of one-to-one from a learning support member to each resident within this secure school, which is then more advantageous. But the report says there's 2-to-1. So first of all, what's the correct number? Is it 1-to-1 or is it 2-to-1?
It's 2-to-1. It's
2-to-1, okay, thank you. To outsiders, there are concerns that there's this complete open policy, because from what I've read, the only way you can lock anything is from the inside of the dorms rather than externally.
That's not true.
Piece of fiction, is it?
Wonderful fiction.
Well, you've got rid of the keys, so you don't have wardens. You've got rid of keys, so you don't have the warden's keys. Everyone's got an electric fob, and the doors are operated that way.
Probably a turn of phrase. So we've got rid of physical keys as much as possible, and we've got fob systems in place in its stead. And the reason for that was the sensory and auditory noise of jangling keys walking around. So you lock and open every single door like you would in a normal secure provision.
Yeah, no, that's fine as well. And that
There are, by the way, there are over 900 security cameras around the place as well. It's very secure for everyone. By the way, I also should say, we're not an evangelical group. I don't know where you read that, but you should get a better kind of newspaper.
Okay. No, that's fine. It's just what I've read and where I've read it from. But one of the other points is that the thing that I liked about this school is the fact that you're not falling into the extremes which Feltham Young Offenders, for example, has done. And so I actually applaud what you're doing on this motion. again, I've read, though, that it costs somewhere in the region of £250,000 per annum to keep each person, which prima facie would seem quite high. And I don't know what the running cost is on that.
I mean, what's the cost of 82% of people reoffending in the first 12 months?
Well, that's a question that I'm going to come to in a moment, Joe. We'll go through these first of all.
So is it worth just saying as you go that it isn't a cost per head at all? It costs the same amount to run the establishment, whether it's got one child in or when it reaches its capacity, when it will have 46 children in. What we are doing is we're ramping up over the course of a year. So by next August, we opened in August, by next August, we will sit at 46 young people. The reason for the ramp up across the year is to get the culture right, because therapy is about the environment, the culture, and the staff.
And that's what you've done really well with regards to the aesthetics of the building and everything. Again, this is everything that I've read. I've not visited yet, and as I say, I would love to. Now, it was mentioned in the report there's 22 residents.
Wayne, are you nearly there?
Yes, I am nearly there, yeah. There was an article in the Times newspaper, 7th of December, Rachel Sylvester, very good. There was only 12 residents that were in attendance. But then within the reports it says 46, but we've also been told there's 49. How many residents are going to be there in total?
Yeah, good questions. 49 was the original, and because of a few rooms that Ofsted didn't think were deemed ready to be opened and needed further building work done, it was reduced to 46. Okay. So that was only happened that last summer. 22 placements is in, that includes those that have come and gone, who are on remand, so it is higher than at the point of which Times came in, and it was 12 children on site at the point where she came, which was a couple of months ago. Yeah, so currently, today, we have 15 on site, and tomorrow it will drop down to 14, and Friday it might go up again to 15, which means there's flux.
No, it's perfect. Everyone deserves a second chance. We've said that. The secure schools, which I've mentioned, you are doing this and you're delivering it and will be delivering this very, very well. I like particularly the fact that the education which you're providing these children, the way in which you're doing it, and correct me if I'm right in this, you could have a 17-year-old who's got a mathematics brain of a 7-year-old, and rather than teaching them at the key stage level, you're doing it as the age appropriate.
Exactly right, yeah.
Perfect. And then my very last point, given the very early days and the unique way which I believe is untested in providing justice, significant reviews will be undertaken through the authorities, which you're doing. As we are in the very, very early days, how are you going to measure the effectiveness? And this goes to this 82.9%. How are you going to measure that effectiveness moving forwards? And then I'm completed. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, just that last question. We're being measured by almost everyone you can possibly imagine. In fact, one of our big problems, we would like you to visit, by the way, and please apply to visit. And there's a bit of a waiting list. And we are available to be visited on the third Thursday of every month. And we're limiting it to that because we have so many inspection bodies and interested professional bodies that the biggest problem we face is that we turn this whole place into a zoo. This is a home for children who are highly traumatized and need peace and calm and security. It's a secure school because it brings them the security that they've lacked. So all I can say, without going into huge detail, is that we are inspected by various bodies, and we ourselves, we're in the process of signing up with Greenwich University, who have a really good criminology department, and they are going to do some independent research for us. Other research is being done by government, etc.
Thank you. Can I ask, in the fairness of equality, that people keep their questions to the paperwork presented by Secure, Oasis Secure, because otherwise we could all be reading the Mail and the Times and getting misinformation. I think I can do that for this meeting because you've had the paperwork in advance. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, Wayne had 7 minutes. That's not fair. Thank you very much, Robbie. I like your opinion. I'm glad you agree with me. Leah.
So firstly, I want to say that I'm just fascinated by it as a concept. It's always been, I think, whenever we've had things about youth justice, I've always felt like we're just not getting it right, because these 82% of people go on to reoffend, and I feel like we do fail them. So I'm really interested in how this progresses, and I'll be following. I also wanted to do that overnight stay, but for different reasons it didn't happen, so I would love to come and visit as well. And then my 2 questions were just a little bit confused on the gender breakdown, because I can see that 99% of the children you've had through are boys, but one girl would have took that to 95%, so I just, like, I don't know if you had a leg.
The person that kindly put this together for me did, yeah, and we sent it, and I said to her afterwards that was wrong, so sorry, yeah, there is one girl there, and only had one girl so far.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
So on that, the other part of that concern, I guess, is if there is only one girl, then I guess it's around like socialisation and friendships and things. I just wondered how that looks. And then on that, in there as well is around safety. And then I wrote one other thing. So if it is then in the future at 50-50, are boys and girls separated within, or are they all just in together?
So shall I answer that? There's a lot about the justice system and the youth justice system which we do not control and cannot control. Of the 500 or so young people in custody at the moment, a handful at the most are girls. So it's disproportionately boys in the system. The justice system at the moment believes in integration. There are issues to do with that we like to tackle. There are issues to do with placing remand children with children that have been sentenced, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole list of things about the system that need changing. We referred to adverse childhood experiences before. Nobody uses this term, that's an ACE. An AS, in my view, is an adverse system experience. And all young people in the justice system have an adverse experience. But what we believe is that because we're in it, that gives us voice to bring pressure around all of these things. In actual fact, the one girl that is with us, she thrives. She does. If you met her, you'd love her. She thrives.
I'd say, I think in principle, probably quite agree with, the concept of integration. I just wondered if you could talk about how you're managing some of the safety aspects.
Of course, yeah. So currently she is in a flat on her own. So her bedroom, if you like, is separated out from anybody else. And then she socialises in the day, goes to education, eats in the dining room when she feels regulated enough to do that, and goes to education with everybody else. So when I said 14 hours out of bedrooms most of the day, so she spends the majority of the day mixing, that is dependent on how she is doing on that day. So if she's regulated and well, then that works well. If she's dysregulated and not feeling great, then we're working with her in the flat with a team of professionals around her. And going forwards, we are looking at where, and obviously strategies around caring for girls across the youth estate are of a lot of interest. And we are looking at where mixing does work well, and if that is something that we could do in the future. So whilst at the moment the plan is to always separate in the residential units, we're looking at whether we've got the flats are arranged so that you have 3 bedrooms on one side, the living room, dining room and kitchen in the middle, all with secure doors in between with locks. And then on the other side is another 3 set of bedrooms. And so if you can have a 3 set of girls and 3 set of boys like that, and then mixing in the middle, there is an option to do that, but that was something we'd only do based on the individual needs of the child, the bespoke assessment around that, including safety, safeguarding and risk assessment from our safeguarding team as well. Her care is exemplary from CNWL and from our side. So in our recent Reg 44 report, one of the things that was praised for was the comments from her parents at how well they've seen her progress, to Steve's point, and how safe she feels and the kind of level of investment that she's got in her education and belief in those around her. she exercises her views a lot all the time, so we hear feedback constantly. So, but yeah, she is doing well. We're hoping that when we can open up more bedrooms, which is around Ofsted approving more bedrooms to be opened, then we will be able to take more girls. So it's something we need to do.
Thank you,
So
Leah.
I had one other bit that we did.
Can we come back at the end? Is that all right? Because I've got 10 people.
Okay.
Thank you. Sharon, then George, then Paula.
Thanks, Jo. Where do I start? Yes, I was also with Leah. We were going to do an overnight stay and it got cancelled, so we would love to reinstate that again. Yeah, the amount of people that reoffend, and I might get this figure slightly wrong, so I'm going to make it a bit broad and approximate, that most people in prisons, about just below half of them have got some other special needs or undiagnosed disability, FASD being one of them up there. You said that you had the Senko on board. Is there a way of diagnosis, a pathway to diagnosis while you're with them? Because especially with FASD, while you're in a supported environment, you can thrive and you can really show, because you've got that scaffolding around you. The minute you go outside that and back into real life, you can fall apart again, which is why they reoffend, because it's not that they haven't learnt, but they just will repeat the same behaviour time and time again. So I was just wondering, because I know people that have reoffended loads of times and then got a diagnosis and it's made. They haven't gone back.
Difference, of course, yeah. One of the things that we're doing is working very closely with the healthcare partner to be able to look at that. So when a child's with us for long enough and they can meet that threshold for diagnosis, which in itself is another system error, isn't it? Then we're working with the child to be able to do that. That is that multidisciplinary team around them to be able to make that assessment. Because the offer from CNWL is so comprehensive, if there was opportunity for diagnosis that we think would then help them as they move on into community, then we have a professional that would be able to do that with them. At the moment, that has largely been around diagnosis for autism. Just not been open that long, not that many children, but there are other opportunities there as well. So that is part and parcel of the commission service from the healthcare team, as well as our in-house Senko that I talked about before as well. I'm going to talk about through the gate.
Yeah. It's also worth saying, adding to what Claire says, that when a child, a young person arrives with us, the first weeks they spend with us, which is as long as it takes, is to work with them, to understand them, their situation. So that, as you pointed out, the education's by stage, not age, but we look at the entirety of that young person's life and their situation, so that we can form a bespoke approach that works for them with them. That's the point. But the thing I wanted to just address is the through the gate moment, as it sometimes gets called, the transition or the step down or whatever it is. That is the toughest day. So Oasis Restore creates an environment where young people are heard, seen, safe, secure, and soothed. The problem is the release day, and the more vulnerable you are, the less provision there is there for you. If you don't have a family, etc., it's a rocky road. And if all the stars align for you, you got a chance. And if they don't, you haven't. So what we are doing, quite outside of our commitment to the Ministry of Justice and the policy and legislation that formed us, is working at our own cost to ensure that we reach the place where every young person has an onward path with us. That's not to take away from the role of the yacht teams, etc., but it's to say that what we want, we cannot have said to a young person that we're here for you and then say goodbye to them at the gate. We will not do that. So in some cases, that's going to mean housing them and working with them and paying for that ourselves, and that's a big subject, but we're very across that and very onto it. Thriving, I have a friend who's got the same name as me, Steve, and he's exactly my age, and he was in Feltham as a young man, and he's a success because he's never reoffended. But he's lonely, he's never worked, he's depressed, he stinks to high heaven, he keeps his clothes in his bath. I've cleaned out his bath more times than you can tell, but still can't encourage him to actually use it for anything else. So we perceive the success as much higher than not reoffending. So.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think everybody does deserve a supporter, but we've got lots of questions for you, so can we keep going, please?
Yeah, sorry.
No worries. Paula, then George.
Okay, so I'll be brief. So the secure school is actually in my ward, and I'm very encouraged to see that we are making significant progress from what we had reported and read about previously. So I really welcome that. My questions are going to be quite succinct, as usual. So you've got 145 staff. And my questions are really about the long-term retention and development of those staff. That's what my concern is, because stability in the workforce is going to be absolutely key here. So you've got 16 in the teaching staff, and I'm specifically concerned about potential turnover of them, because enabling the young people to leave with some sense of educational achievement is going to be absolutely key here as well. So just wondering if you can talk through a little bit about your staff retention strategies that you are currently looking at. And then the other question is really about, again, very much focused on what's your educational ambition for each individual child. What do you see as a success for them in terms of that, given that there's a strong focus on vocational education? And what do you see, what's your learner profile? What are you looking to encourage in them as a learner?
Brilliant questions from now to say that. I've been told it sounds patronising, but I generally think they're good. So I think first thing, retention, especially in secure estate, we're really, really cognizant of that. And being a new entity means that we've recruited people to a blank page. We haven't existed, and we did that, and they started last March, so March 2024. We were always anticipating there would probably be a spike in people leaving once the reality of the role hits. So we've been anticipating that, talking with the board about it. So there will be some churn to start with as we settle. So that's sort of first comment. Second thing to say is provision of line management supervision, group reflective practice, where we can feasibly ensure that that happens in amongst rota, so we're not compromising on the safety of children. And that Mulberry Bush course that I was talking about, the level 4 qualification over 2 years, which includes residential, are some of the preventative factors that we've put in to ensure that we're psychologically containing staff and supporting them and processing that with them. We have a lot of support with that, again, with CNWL, who provide the facilitation of the group reflective practice and one-to-one support for staff that have, in the broadest sense of the term, lived experience as well, because obviously this can be quite triggering work, working with children like this. The teaching staff are phenomenal. I think they're excellent people, they're incredibly values aligned and driven, and are really enjoying working on a basis of sometimes such close numbers of children with them. So they're almost getting more satisfaction out of the work here than they would in a mainstream school. So that feels, sorry to use that phrase, but it does feel very steady right now. We have worked hard with that teaching staff. We've got them on board last September, and they have co-produced all of their curriculum designs, schemes of learning, and our skills framework that we use to assess children with. So there's a lot of buy-in and investment, which is a massive opportunity that you're never going to get again. Our restore practitioners are the ones that are asked to do the hardest tasks often and are working on shifts. And so the support of them is integral, with really good line management and a kind of organisational structure around them, along with the group reflective practice and supervision that I've mentioned. I can only say that I really agree, and we are really aware that keeping hold of these staff, nurturing and caring for them will only be, if we do that well, the children will be cared for well. And it's going to be an ongoing learning journey along with everything we've got planned. And so it's a very live topic for us. Just on the ambitions for children, the way that being able to think stage, not age, is enabling us to work with them on what they're interested in, and then using, and very, very intentionally using literacy and numeracy embedded throughout everything that we do. So our head of Maths and English has worked in training all our Restore practitioners to think, when you're doing breakfast with a child, this is how you can be teaching them English, and this is how you can be teaching them maths. And their feedback from children has been phenomenal on that. And I would say that often we label these children as not having particular ability to attain in those areas, and it's not true in our experience to date. So we've had 2 already sit their first functional maths exams. They got up at 9 a.m, they were ready and waiting and taking it, and both of them passed. So there's that sort of early green shoots are good things.
It's worth saying the Chief Inspector of Prisons said to me that he expected us to get a 50% churn of staff in the first year, simply because of the factors that Claire has talked about. It's just the way it is.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy with that, Paula? Yeah. Can I just say, because of time, what I'm going to do now, Claire and Steve, is take 3 questions from people at a time. So that will be George, Douglas and Liz, then Adrian, Robbie and Leah, because we're running out of time. And then could you try and tackle them in a sort of nest? In a nest, yeah. In a nurtured nest.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for coming along, and thank you for all that you're doing, and in particular, Steve, thank you for coming, because I think the work that Oasis do, not just obviously through Oasis Restore, but also the Oasis Charitable Trust, it's very important. You've got other schools in Medway as well, so very thankful for you coming along to see us, much appreciated. Just a couple of questions for me that are quite specific, actually. The first one's just about how you're finding the interaction with HMP Rochester. Obviously being on the same site, I know you had concerns previously, so just be interested in terms of how you're finding that. Obviously they've had an urgent notification and there are significant problems there. Just interested to see how you're finding that interaction, any concerns you might have. Second question, just about, I know your Principal Director, Andy Willits, who I've met with during the setup process a couple of times, actually, and been very grateful for his briefing and support, just in terms of where you are at in terms of recruiting a new Principal Director. And then my final question is just about the Ministry of Justice. I know you had lots of support previously from former Minister Ed Arg, former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab and others. I'm just interested in terms of how you're finding the support with the department under the new government, in terms of funding and future sort of capital works you might be identifying, etc., and things that you're discussing with them. And then just finally, in terms of the interface with the DFE and also with the council, I don't imagine you're having sort of lots of interaction with the council, but just in terms of how you're finding that would be really useful for me as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I quickly say...
Oh, hang on, we're just going to do, if that's okay, Douglas and Liz as well.
Oh, I see, I beg your pardon, Chair.
Okay, thank you. First thing I would say is every child does matter. We're in Medway, and I'm so happy that you guys have the passion and the heart to address them in the right way. I was keen to look at some of the curriculum, the subjects that they study, and I didn't see any reference to goal setting. English, maths, we know they're stable, but that has to be in relation to something a young person wants to go on and achieve. So working with the goal-setting mindset, that's where you can then measure their progress, and they will have something that they can continue on when they get discharged into the community, when they go back into the community. Without a goal in life, you can do as much education as you like, you're a leaf in the wind. And the people I've supported in the communities who have reoffended have no goal. So aspiration is one thing, but you have to be moving in the direction of a specific goal. So my question is around that. Also, could you consider maybe, or you might do already, civic duties, so they understand such things such as the Electoral Commission. They understand they do matter, their communities do value them, and this is how they can engage with the community when they're back in the community. And also, the last one is about role modeling. Do you have any opportunities for, because the 68% black, African, black or mixed race heritage, and that hurts me. I've got to say out frankly, you know, one can't rise above the condition of his own people. So that hurts me a lot. But there are underlying reasons for that. So are you actively seeking interventions for that, such as, I know there are role models in the black community where they want to go in and support providing that role as a father figure to some of these individuals who didn't have that structure in the first place. So it's about role modeling, civic duties, and goal setting. Thank you.
And finally, Liz.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to you both for being here this evening. It's really important that we can speak to you directly, so it's really great, and thanks for the invitation as well to come along. I just wanted to talk a couple of points about the sort of, you push very much about it being, it's not about punishment. So I guess that's, you've probably found in presentations thing that's probably quite controversial, and you'll have people with very strong views either way. And, you know, obviously I'm no expert on this, and you know, I appreciate that you've done lots of research and studies and you're the professional. So I just wondered on that, and you talked about in also sort of connection with that the Ministry of Justice have sort of passed over to you. Does that mean that they don't have any involvement with the child? Because I'm just, okay, yeah. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, how does that work with sort of when you talked about sort of very much about setting them free, and when we talk about that physically happening, you know, if you've got your concerns about whether it's appropriate timing, you know, do the Ministry of Justice step in at that point, or how does that work? And then with the sort of the punishment, is there still sort of responsibility, I guess, is what I want to know, because at the end of the day they've committed a crime, and that's often, most crimes, I guess, there's two parties. There's the person that's committed the crime, and there's the person that's the victim, who are also traumatised by what's happened. So I just wondered whether you get feedback on how that victim feels about this sort of lack of punishment, and also the behaviour within, you know, your setting. How do you deal with poor behaviour if there's no punishment? Because obviously in schools you'd be sent out of the classroom or you'd get a detention or something. So how do you sort of deal with the poor behaviour, not just from why they're there, but while they're with you? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of punishment, we are not excusing poor behaviour. We are understanding it. And unless we understand it as a society, we won't go forward, which is why we have such a high reoffending rate at the moment. We recognise that there's always a victim of the crime as well. So a trauma-informed approach, a therapeutic approach, isn't in denial of that. In actual fact, you have to face yourself and your own behaviours in order to come to a place of healing. So I could say much more about that, but I won't say any more because not enough time to. We are setting young people free. In the end, they will be set free physically. Unless they're set free psychologically, they will reoffend and cost the state a huge amount. So it's our job to do all of those things. Claire, why don't you talk about the principle? You principle.
So we have gone out to advert, and the deadline for applications is next Friday. We're recruiting at the end of January, and the interest has been phenomenal in response. Because it's a public meeting, I won't necessarily say any more about the figures, but it's been amazing. So we're really, really hopeful of our new candidate being in the next 3 months. In the meantime, we have an executive, so I'm part of the executive along with Steve, a CFO and a chief people officer as well. So we're working very closely. So I'm there most days working closely with the leadership team. But we're very really excited about that. Can I just quickly answer on behaviour in the school as well, just because there is, we don't punish, but we have natural consequences. So just like you would with your own children at home, X has happened, okay, the natural consequence of that is Y. That is discussed through our core team meeting often and with the Restore practitioners on the ground. So there are what we call firm but fair boundaries at all times. I don't want people to think this is a kind of free-for-all where there's no, it's good enough parenting, just like you would do with any other child, and that is all detailed in our restorative policy, which probably isn't on our website yet, but it will be, and that's all there, along with our restraint reduction policy and use of physical force, which we have to have as a legal requirement as a children's home.
Yeah, if you smash your TV, you don't need to punish anyone for it. The consequence is you've got no TV. Example. In terms of the questions around, if I leave Claire to talk about the MOJ and support, etc., etc. In terms of the questions around civic duty and role modelling, etc., and the curriculum, it's all about, everything is about pathways. Everything is preparing for that day when the young person leaves us. That is the most important day in their life. If you leave without a friend and a home and a job or the chance to do further education, you will struggle. You'll really struggle. So it's all about that. We need role models. Our staff are diverse. If you came to meet them, we got some extraordinary people working for us. We got people with lived experience of having been through the youth justice system and the justice system themselves. And that is of huge help. But we look out for volunteers. So if you're part of a football group or a chess group or a photography group, etc., at the end of the day, we aim, as Claire's already said, when our children go to bed at night, we aim for them to fall asleep because they're exhausted by the fun and the learning of the day. So, you know, we're not a closed shop at all, and we are very keen on people coming in. Yet, just today, I've had a long discussion, well, I've been having a long discussion, but finalised it, Claire doesn't know this yet because we've not had a chance to talk, with Jamie Oliver and his team so that we can begin to give real qualifications in chefing and cooking, etc., because everything has to be about role models and pathways to good employment. That is the direction of travel for the whole of our curriculum.
Shall I, just to build on that, we've also got an integrated blended PSHE programme that we deliver along with our healthcare partners as well, that deals with what you typically call offender management behaviour, and then also looks at things like civic duty in its very specific form. So you mentioned about electoral role, yes. I think all civic of those duty. Things, civic duties. So that's all embedded in, and that's delivered as part of our school timetable of the day as well, just like you would in school, trying to build on that. Think about liaison with the DFE. DFE, originally this was a tri-government approach to this, and as Steve said, I mean, we got this in 2019. We worked very hard with the MOJ and the DFE to change policy and make sure that we increased funding for the building and revenue funding to get to where we are today. That took 3 years. DFE involvement in that was really helpful at the start because their experience with free schools and academy trusts and one of the longest running programmes in academisation. Their involvement now is limited depending on capacity because of DFE, central government capacity. There's warmth towards it, I would say, but not necessarily active engagement. With council, with MOJ support, generally very good. We have a relationship manager in place. I meet with them once a week. They ask the right questions. They're across everything, all the detail. That's a good working relationship. And Steve and I meet with the head of YCS on a monthly basis as well. So that's maintained. With council, we're obviously reporting to Medway Safe, I was going to say MSCP, I'm not allowed to use acronyms, but Secure Estate Subcommittee. We've got another meeting coming up in a couple of weeks, I believe. So that engagement's good. Equally, though, that the ask here is for anyone advocacy is always really helpful. Your interest, your questions, please do get in contact about that as well. Did we miss anything?
I think we covered it. I wrote down the first word was interaction, and I can't remember where we've answered that because I can't remember what the question was. But apart from that, I've ticked them all off on the.
Brilliant, thank you. So the last three, can you stick to just 2 questions as a maximum, please? That's Adrian, Robbie and Leah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I really do wish you well because, in my opinion, the youth justice system run by the Ministry of Justice over the last probably 30, 40 years in this country has been a complete and utter disaster. So I wholeheartedly welcome this new approach. I wish you well. I was going to talk a bit about Cook and Wood, but I'll leave that to one side because we haven't got time. What I would like to know, with certainly from my experience, and I chaired Medway's Community Safety Partnership, so I took quite a lot of interest in this. there are two specific areas that have really marred youth justice system and also, then on to adults, but it's particularly bad for children. That is the problems of substance misuse, and also that the gang culture that many of them have been involved in big cities then enters into the secure estate. How are you dealing with those two issues, please?
Robbie, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is, to what extent is your approach, being informed by your Christian faith, played a role above the benefit affording to you by the super concentration of resource that you spend, like 2 to 1, for example, which I know is not that different from other high offending units. So I'm not saying you get an extra, but I'm saying, to what extent has these factors played a role above that? As someone who went to a Catholic primary school and values that considerably in my life every day. My second question is, even though this is a new place, given that you've been assisting people, I read in the Times, since 1990, what is your approach and your prediction, rather, at the difference in that reoffending rate that you expect to see, which is going to be ultimately the factor whether your approach goes nationwide or not? Is it significantly less or more than 83%? I know you can't give an exact figure, but 1990, you've got to feel for it. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you for being patient, Vice Chair. Leah.
So it was my last one. It was just that in the report there was lots of hypotheticals about how incidents would be dealt with. I think probably because this was made before pupils were in. But I just wondered if any have happened thus far, and if you could kind of talk us through any lessons that have been learned from it or best practice and things.
So if I do with that one first, and substance misuse, gang culture, and Steve will talk about the rest, but just to say, Steve may not know this, the 2 to 1 is also a legal requirement from Ofsted for a children's home, so even if we didn't want to do that, but you'll be able to comment more on it. So with incidents, yes, we have had them for sure. These children are dysregulated, they've had a lifetime of trauma, etc. So we have daily debriefs looking at incidents. So what we do is review the CCTV, we get the staff involved in, we have a reflective session, we look at what went well, what would be our even better ifs, and then that gets shared with the staff there, and we try and include that in handovers for all staff as well. Most of the learning there is around placement of adults, and also the fact that sometimes we're probably too reticent to get involved because we're trying to be kind and nurturing when actually we probably could have held the boundary a bit better and seen it a bit better. So it's almost the opposite problem of perhaps what you might have seen in other settings. It's a confidence and a willingness to step in, and it's okay. So on the whole, our learning around that has been, I would say, positively skewed, if that makes sense. There's been no serious assaults of any kind, so we haven't need to assess that. There have been a couple of child-on-child assaults, and the learning from that has generally been, could we have seen that dysregulation earlier? What was going on the floor where we could have perhaps seen, if we'd listened to that and attended to it, we could have said, you know what, those two mixing tonight over the football pitch probably won't work. We need to do some restorative justice with work with them. So the learning is generally around how we're looking to prevent. Does that answer your question enough? Yeah. For substance misuse and gang culture. So substance misuse currently for us isn't particularly high for children on entry. That's not something we're having to deal with generally. So we do have the service on site through CNWL if we need to, but on the whole it's been okay. Probably a bit of children are experiencing a come down because they've been out all night or something for the last 2 days, but that is, within 24 hours, and some sleep, rest, food, care, that they're generally okay. Gang culture, and thinking about that, is obviously rife, oh goodness, in the country as a whole, and we're seeing that, aren't we, play out in press and nationally through knife crime. That all becomes part and parcel of our work with PSHECE programme and thinking about offender management, and then through the core team, how we're working with children with therapeutic work at a tier 1 to 3. So an example of that might be doing life story work with a child to think about what their life story is and what's triggered them and got them involved in gang culture in the first place. We're only able to do that with children who are ready and open to it because it can be quite dysregulating, but we are seeing success with that. So the kind of several interventions that we're doing and the use of enrichment and people coming in and delivering enrichment There's charities that do that, that do some work called Heroes Pathway. They will talk, they're often role models that will talk with children about their experience of being involved in gang culture and how they're being supported out of that. So it's kind of an integrated model through various points throughout our curriculum design, integrated holistic curriculum design, that we deal with that. And the substance misuse at the moment just isn't something that's ticking up, but we've had a very low number of children.
Thank you.
Okay.
Adding to the gang thing, of course, one of the problems with the system is it sends young people back to the community that they came from, where the gang's waiting for them, because the gang owns them, because gangs are run by serious organised crime. Gangs aren't local, they are national drug delivery networks, and they are national robbery networks. And they are controlled from outside the country, they're mafia-driven, and the kids in them are just pawns. So if you send a child back to their home community who's vulnerable, they will reoffend because they are slaves of the gang. Modern slavery, when we talk about it, the most prolific form of modern slavery is teenagers in gangs in our country. So the work that we do beyond the gate that I was referring to earlier, where we provide alternatives for young people in halfway houses, etc., that becomes really important. At the moment, everybody reoffends. The 82.9% is from the government website, and it says 82.9 are proven to reoffend, i.e. they have been reconvicted. I can't believe that anybody leaves in the current system without falling back into the networks they're in. We have to break that. We've got to work at that. And as I said earlier, that sits outside of our remit from government, but not outside of our vision. Which leads me into the issue of Christian faith and theology. The reason that you may have heard that that we're an evangelical outfit is that I'm a Christian and I'm a Baptist minister. If you talk to evangelicals in the Church of England or the Baptist denomination or any other one, they probably hate me more than you can possibly imagine because they do not consider me an evangelical at all. And the reason for that is because of our inclusion, our theology of inclusion, which sits right at the heart of everything we are. In fact, the very circle, you can't see it all there. Oh, yes, an Oasis circle, we call it, our students in our schools. In Gillingham, for instance, they would know that this is the Oasis Circle of Inclusion. It's their badge. We include everyone. We work for everyone. Why? Because we believe everyone is made in the image of God, every single individual. So our theology isn't divorced from our work. Of course, for all of us, what we believe is how we behave in the end, isn't it? There's a connection between the two. So it's our theology and our philosophy that drives us. I was interviewed on Radio 4 on the Sunday programme, where they said, just the other week, and the interviewer, who I didn't think was very good, said to me, he asked a question, he said, so this is all based on Baptist theology? No, it's not. It's based on science. It's based on what we know about childhood and adolescent brain development. It's based on what we understand about a traumatized brain and how it changes. It's not feelings that change, it's brain shape that changes. So it's based around that. But actually, all good science, that there should be no conflict between your theology and your philosophy and science. If your philosophy and your theology are in conflict, get a new theology that fits with some science, you know. So our theology is simply this, that we don't believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I'm a Christian, so I would say, nor did Jesus. He said, you've heard that said, but I'm telling you love. I'm telling you love. And what we know is that these young people haven't been loved, but we know that love changes the shape of the brain and regulates. That's what we're about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
There was my second question, Chair, which was his assessment since 1990 on whether or not he's going to achieve any variance in reoffending rates. This is going to be the assessment measure.
I mean, the hope would be absolutely, the extent to which we can do that is the extent to which we can say, sort of change the whole system as well. Our contribution to that and how we assess that will be everything. So we will do destination assessments. So where does the child end up going? The majority of children that stay with us for any length of time will be sentenced and go on to the adult estate. And then, therefore, the portion of that child depends how long they're there for. So why are we in this? Because we want to absolutely change that statistic in the next 10 years. We will be looking to measure that. At the extent to which we can change that within the next 3, given that we're one part of a larger system, will remain to be seen. Does that make sense? Oh, since 1990. That's Steve's to me.
Basically, you started in 1990, right? Not with this outfit, but with a previous outfit, right? So that's your philosophy. Your essence is you, right? It's just you're the essence. So 1990 is a long enough time to have done some investigation on outcome pathways. So what's your flavour?
Okay, I didn't recognise the date 1990 because we didn't begin in 1990. Actually, Oasis began in 1985. And the very first project that I ever set up, and I say I, not to be individualistic about it, but Oasis was only me then. We still run today. In fact, I was just talking to Southwark Council about it earlier today. It's a housing project for young people. I managed in the end to buy this house with 16 bedrooms, and we took 16 young people in who hadn't been loved, hadn't been secure, etc., etc., etc. And called it, we wanted to provide an oasis for people, which is how Oasis got its name, through this hostel. And I was absolutely appalled, this was in the mid-80s, at these kids that turned up, because I'd worked so hard to create a home for them, and they wouldn't look at me, they never said please, they never said thank you, they wouldn't engage, and they nicked their own stuff, their kettles, they kicked their doors through, and we had this huge television, and somebody even walked off with that and sold it. And I was... And slowly, this is before neuroscience became a thing, before the MRI scanner, I slowly, and it was very slowly in my case, I worked out that if they had no arms or no legs, I would have compensated for them. I would have opened doors for them. If their disability had been physical, I would have known how to deal with it. But the best way I could say it was their disabilities were inside their heads. They wounded inside their heads. And I realized back then, I did realize that it was relationship and love that would turn the key. Now, over the years of that, I've not got time to tell you the stories, and we've done a huge amount of research, but literally thousands and thousands of young people's lives have been turned around, and almost everywhere I go. I spoke at a Catholic educational conference on Monday, for a big Catholic mat. There were several hundred people there, their leaders, and one after one afterwards they came up to me, and people always say to me, because I'm so old, they say, Steve, when I was a kid, when I was young, and they look old to me, and I think, oh my life, I must be really old. I was in your hostel. I joined this project. I worked for Oasis in this. I went abroad with Oasis, and it changed my life. I know that love and attention changes people's lives. And let's face it, if the re-offending rate is almost 100%, well, we haven't got to do very much to make it a little bit better.
Thank you so much. Can I just say, when we invite you back, because you will be invited back, what we might need to do, Leah and Mark, and anyone else that's interested, is have some targeted questions on data and probably give you some scene stuff of where we want to go with this. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of evening and get warm, because we're freezing here. Adrian.
Thank you.
Joe,
do come. Yeah, I mean, you are really welcome to come and stay. Unfortunately, there's no chance to sleep over anymore, because you have to commit a very serious crime to get into that house.
Joe, just before Claire and Steve leave us, I'd just like to all of us to think back to just over a year ago, when we had a presentation from the then Deputy Governor of Cook and Wood, and compare what we've heard tonight. What a difference.
Yes, when children are
difference.
hurting inside, you don't lock them up and throw away the key for 23 hours. Absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. Vice Chair Leah, thank you. I'm not locking you up.
I say before you leave, it's probably worth watching that back on YouTube if you've got a bit. That when Cook and Wood came in was quite an interesting meeting. But I move that we note the report and all of the positive things that we've just had.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Wayne. And agreed? Thank you all. Thank you. Right, Wellbeing, you've sat for a long time, ladies. Thank you. You're going to do a slight presentation. Oh, we've seen everything. No, okay. Yeah, off you go then. Questions? We're on to the children's, young people, wellbeing and emotional across Medway. And Eilish and Hannah are going to say some things. Thanks. First, then we'll go in.
Okay, literally will take 2 minutes just to say that we came with the ICB last year to talk about the next step in terms of procurement of children's community mental health and emotional wellbeing services. So this is an update to committee on the fact that that is now started. The first contract that the ICB wants to go out on is that therapeutic alliance, which we've described within the paper. And I guess the slight change from when we came last year is that what we've advocated for with the ICB is that instead of there being a single Kent and Medway Therapeutic Alliance, actually we're going to have a separate Medway Therapeutic Alliance and a Kent contract. And that's because that aligns with our social care services and also aligns with our education services. So it makes sense, we think, for our young people to be able to have that ability to have the nuances within a Medway model. And then the rest of the paper goes on to talk about the existing services that are in place and available and the way that we've grown those over the last few years. And what our intention is that the Therapeutic Alliance will then pull those together so we've got a more coordinated offer that's easier for families and professionals to navigate. And that's it. I'm open to questions from there.
Okay, questions then, please. Leah? Adrian.
So I just had the one that should be fairly quick. It's just how easy is the route for parents to refer into these services and how are we communicating to parents that it exists? So if someone calls the main line for CAMS, are we perhaps directing them to the less intrusive interventions? Or because that CAMS form is excessively long and actually I don't think we necessarily need to go straight in that hard.
Yeah, so we've done an awful lot to try and promote the services that are available. We've, as we talked about in this, we've got a directory of services that professionals will be able to support parents with. That's been offered within schools as well as across primary care. We've got websites and information. Of course, we work with Medway Parent Carers Forum a lot to make sure that they're informed and aware of what the services are available. But actually, exactly as you say, if somebody referred into CAMS and CAMS wasn't the appropriate service for them, there would be an assessment done and they would be signposted to the appropriate services back in the community and that lower level intervention. So those pathways already exist. And what we're proposing with this new model is that there would be a single referral and assessment point. I've got to get the language right. A single referral and assessment point, and that would act in the same way. There would be a single place for parents to refer into, professionals to refer into, and they would do the work of understanding, can we meet the needs of this child, or are their needs more complex and need to be referred up to CAMS, with an idea of them working in partnership.
Thank you. Adrian?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Ailish. I really welcome this, and I'm very pleased to see that the Medway focus on it, and it's perhaps something we should bear in mind when we have future discussions on the future of arrangements for councils in the area. I really do think this is a good. I'm pleased. Leah's question was very similar to mine. I was hoping that you would say that it would be more accessible and easily accessible, because one of the problems is the threshold for CAMS services always seems quite high, and there's a lot of young people that, yes, they've got quite severe disruptive behaviour, but it doesn't seem to reach the CAMS threshold. So, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, Joe. I'd like to, sometimes, we all, particularly when it comes to mental health issues, are very, very critical. But I was really heartened yesterday at the fostering panel where we had a case of a young Medway child who 2 years ago didn't want to go to school, was self-harming both by cutting and swallowing every tablet she could get her hands on. Now, thanks to the work with CAMS, and I've got to say, 2 really fantastic foster parents, really fantastic. They've turned that child's life round. She's now attending school, doing well, and has had no instances of self-harm. So there is some good news stories out there. It's not all bad, and it was quite heartening, and that's what, I've had a warm glow when we've, recommended that the placement should be confirmed. So there is some good work going on, but I think the message, we can still do better, though.
Well, I think, thank you, Adrian. Medway foster parents do rock, and I would be saying that, wouldn't I? But also, when I got elected in 2019, I used to want to wear armour when parents and carers and even Children's Forum talked to me, Parent Forum talked to me about mental health. We are definitely going in the right direction, and these women have championed our children. And for me, I got well emotional when I read the personal experiences, and I know I'm an emotional being, but they really got to me at the difference we are making in Medway. So thank you for that, Adrian. And we're on to David now.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time I've been to Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny. However, I sit on the planning committee, and one of the issues that we seem to have got a glut of about a year to about 6 months ago, it's quieted down a bit, is there was a big glut of 2-person child private care homes that seemed to be coming through the system, and we had a very specific issue where the planning, under planning, we would have to raise planning matters. So, is that appropriate? Does that fit in? We all, as a committee, really wanted to raise care issues and making sure that we're doing well for the young people. And we had to come up with a special formulae of words that talked about this is a planning matter, but actually there's further considerations from the childcare provision. So I just wanted to link into this report just to see how are we doing with that, what seemed to be a sudden emergence of kind of private childcare provision, and how are those service providers being made to actually engage with our support services and making sure that those children who are very, very vulnerable, and it's quite a scary business model actually, that they're fully accessing and fully cared for in those situations.
I might direct that question to James. I wanted to call you David, James Harmon.
Yeah, thanks. It was myself that came to planning committee to do some of that work. It's an ongoing piece of work that we've been looking at. It links into papers that we've brought here into the Wellbeing Board before around children placed out of area in Medway and the impact that has on the wider system. There will be that impact back to the services that Ailish and Hannah were talking about, because obviously if children reside in our area, they're entitled to get the services that other young people do. We continue to work closely with planning. In fact, I wrote a response back to one application yesterday just to outline where our concerns were. You're absolutely right. It was a difficult it's a difficult thing to do within planning regulations to actually give feedback around providers and young people placed there. So from that perspective, we're continuing to work with the new providers that are trying to set up to try and establish an informed planning as to what we know about those providers. It also links in with our wider sufficiency strategy that we'll be updating next year as well, which will talk about what sort of provision we want in Medway for our young people, because, you know, we need to concentrate on our young people being housed in Medway. So I hope that gives you sort of an overview, but we are continuing to work with planning officers and indeed people that come forward around, you know, children's homes, supported accommodation homes that want to come through and register and get planning permission.
Thanks, James. Eilish?
Thank you. The other thing I would just add to that is that it's one of the great advantages of having a partnership commissioning team is that we've got staff who are commissioning on behalf of the ICB but are sitting across the council tables. And so because we attend things like Corporate Parenting Board, SEND Partnership Board and other Children's Improvement Board meetings, we understand better, I think, some of the acute needs of our children in care. And so we have been able to commission, for example, you'll see in the pack, the Short Intervention Therapy Service, which is bespoke for care experienced children to be able to ensure that they're able to get rapid access to therapy and support. And that was also driven from the fact that what we understood, coming back to Adrian's point about the threshold for CAMS seeming high, it's appropriate because they should be dealing with children with specialist needs and diagnosable mental health conditions. But then where was the support for people underneath that? And that's the work that we've been doing over the last few years, is to build that lower level support, but also some of those bespoke pathways for our children in care and care experienced children to ensure they're able to access that support in a timely way.
Just one little follow-up, probably for you, James. Are we having difficulties? How is that sector responding to when we're as a multi-partnership try and approach them and try and make sure that we're looking that those children are getting there? Are there any difficulties in terms of, you know, some of those providers might have their own incentives about how their industry works? Are we able to effectively work in partnership with them, or are there any worries about actually how we deal with those kind of like small childcare homes?
Yeah, I mean, the sector is very complex. You've got a huge amount of growth that are looking to move into the sector because they've seen that there's the need there, there's the demand there, and of course there's the finance that sits behind it. We're very, very confident about the quality standards that we expect for homes for our children. And we would also expect other local authorities who might want to place children in our authority to also look for those high standards of accommodation. So we've got a very robust, I think I've mentioned it before, 70-point quality assurance plan that actually we sit across that. And we want to be a local authority of choice for those providers, but they have to be good. We don't want anybody setting up and link back to the paper that I talked about beforehand. What I don't think we can have in Medway is more growth in the same areas of those sorts of provisions where we've got several provisions on the same streets in the areas that I don't need to name that might also have vulnerable adults placed in those streets as well, might have high levels of crime, safety, antisocial behaviour, all of those sorts of things. You know, so we're looking for people to come in and do something a bit different but of a good quality. So I've gone around the answer a little bit because there's no real firm answer to that, but we're certainly holding that line and saying, actually, if you want to come and set up in Medway, you need to work with us.
Okay, Vice Chair.
No, I move that the committee supports the contracting approach described and that NHS Kent and Medway ICB continue to provide regular updates to the committee as the work progresses, and that we note the current service offer for children and young people in Medway.
Is that seconded? Yep. And agreed? Can I say a big thank you for ring fencing and keeping Medway and improving what is good, and what you do, especially with children, is amazing. Have a lovely rest of evening. Bye-bye. Now it's James, and we're looking at short breaks and sufficiency. Thank you.
So I'll keep it succinct again. I'll presume that everybody's read the paper and just give you a sort of 90-second overview of the key points. This is a continued work in progress. We started a root and branch review under the instruction of Celia and others 18 months ago to look at our short breaks offer, and the paper outlines the sorts of things that we've done in there. And I think we've taken some really positive steps. We're not there yet, but there's some really positive steps. I think, or I'd like to think, and Lisa might be able to say, that we've worked really well with the Parent and Carers Forum on this bit of work, and it has been sort of co-production and consultation throughout. And that's really helped shape what we're planning on doing. Two bits of positive information that weren't in the report that I just wanted to give you tonight is that in Q3, so that's the October to December period, the ROC short breaks provision at Rivermead Trust supported 176 young people, 130 families over nearly 700 sessions, which is a massive increase on what they did before, and bearing in mind that period is pretty much one half term, as well as all the stuff that they've developed afterwards. It's really, really increased high quality provision. And there are reports on top of this that show the feedback from parents about how they've welcomed those services. And we've also had our 5 residential young people apprentices start, which is part of the DFE funding that we got. Which we've got 5 Medway young people that are have joined us now and will be training up to be residential support workers to either work in Parklands, Rock or Eden House. So they're on that journey, and they're 5 fantastic young people who are really, really keen to develop those careers and come from a variety of kind of backgrounds, care experience, NEET, all of those sorts of things. So 2 positive pieces of news that weren't featured in the report. Happy to take questions.
Adrian?
Thank you, Joe. And I think this is a fantastic service. And obviously, it would be nice actually to have some feedback of how it must have benefited people. I'm just a little bit confused. On page 138, there's mention of a saving of 200k, which is then going to be reinvested back into the service. I presume it's the short break service, not the service generally. But if you look at the Table 2 on page 146, you can see much larger figures are needed in future years. So I'm having difficulty understanding the connection between what's said on page 138 and what's there on page 146.
Yeah, so I can pick that up. So what we've done is we've really streamlined the service. So it was quite clunky before, lots of toing and froing. We weren't using any electronic forms. We were using a lot of manual stuff to do that. There was also a lot of inequity in the offer as well. So, some families were getting everything, some families weren't getting anything. So that was really key to what we were doing in bringing that in. So a lot of those efficiencies around time and management have created those savings, and around making sure that people aren't getting paid double for the same thing and those sorts of things. Where we're looking at the sort of investment figures is that over the years there has been a slow build up of backlog of requests and how they've been processed. So what we've got agreement centrally for is basically to invest short term to get that backlog down, to get the timeliness of assessments down. So over the long term period, it's going to be a far more effective, cost-effective service. But in the short term, we do need some investment to be able to get those applications processed and get services to families that need them. So it's sort of a short-term pain, but a long-term gain for the whole thing.
Lisa from the Parents Forum.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think, I've always raised short breaks sufficiency, and I think, I would like to think that the forum pushed the need for the actual review in general. I think for me, there's still a huge backlog, and we know this, and I'm really pleased to see the changes. I know I spoke to Sarah recently about the increased support that's going into that. I think we just need to be mindful that there is a huge backlog, and I think I'd like to see it done and cleared soon, but I'm holding my breath. But obviously it says there's an increase on page 145 of 10% each year of increase. And I think whilst there is, I wonder how many is in that backlog. I also wonder how many that's actually going to increase, because if really effectively that's never been advertised as something that we offer to families, because we always know there's a bit of backlog. So I do have concerns around that huge increase that will be.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, because anytime a service isn't necessarily working how you want it, you're not necessarily getting the take-up. The more promotion you do, the more take-up you get. Our feeling is probably most people are aware of it in some form at the moment, and I think there's been a lot of really good feedback. And in fact, I had Sam and Sarah come to me today with another idea that came up from you guys about how we can further streamline and make the experience better for parents and carers. So we're looking into how we can impact that now. We have got one person recruited into the additional roles. We're just waiting for the onboarding there, so hopefully they'll hit the ground running, and the other one should be out for advert soon. But we have got some of my wider team that are trying to help out as well, just to get that backlog down. And some of the new processes and procedures are already seeing us being able to process more in a shorter amount of time. So hopefully parents and carers over the next few months should really start to see those changes around both renewals and initial applications.
James, as you were just talking about staffing, are they full-time equivalent staff? Yeah, brilliant, thanks. Liz, you're next. Oh, sorry, Mariah.
In terms of the financial impact of the backlog, actually I know which cases are in the backlog and are waiting and have been previously approved. They're just going through the reapplication process. We try and take account of those that are waiting in that backlog in the financial forecast. So don't think, oh, you've got a backlog, there's about another £400,000 to go on top of that. We include that in your forecasts.
Sorry, the backlog my concern around is the 13-month wait of those families that are waiting for that short break service, so they're not known to the service necessarily already. I do still think there's a big review needs to happen around those who already are receiving short breaks and those that are having a full assessment, because I think that's going to have an impact as well, because if they're waiting that long, they're going to end up in crisis, and we're going to end up with more needing a full assessment rather than just a short break service.
Yeah, James, when I was last at Parent Forum, there were people that had 2 short breaks and someone that had been on the waiting list for 8 months. So can I just follow that up with, is it so usual to not review short breaks since 2016? Because that just seems to be really remissed, because you're obviously not doing anyone a service then, are you? Because you're not up to speed on everything. Was that the Tory administration, or what was that?
I certainly can't answer that latter question. But yes, you're absolutely right. It should have been reviewed before now. And to be absolutely fair to Celia, one of the first things that she said when she came in was phone me and say, James, what's happening here? And I said, I've got no idea, it doesn't come under my remit. So one of the things we had to do was basically pull all the different parts together. We had some bits that were sitting in Celia's service, some bits were sitting in children's services, the administration sat in adult social care. So we had to bring all of that together to find a single picture of what that looked like. So you're absolutely right, it should be reviewed like any other strategy policy every 3 years as part of a cycle, and that's what we're hoping to move forward. Now we've got the new statement and the strategy in place, that will be on a cycle of review to make sure that we're up with national legislation and all of those sorts of elements. Your point about sort of double booking, as it were, we're absolutely aware of that, and that is what we've tried to address in this new criteria. We knew people, if they were savvy, might be getting a direct payment, might be getting a short break at Parklands, might be getting a short breaks grant, might be accessing HAF programme. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we didn't have that, and that actually some of the families that weren't getting anything got something, and those sorts of things. So there will be some families that you know, things will change a little bit for, but it is about equity across the piece and making sure all our families get what they need around their short breaks offer, and indeed that we have a good availability of services for people to choose from.
Brilliant. I did watch the piece with Luella and Tracy on Cabinet about this as well, so thank you. Sorry, Liz, I know you're passionate about this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I am, and thanks very much for the report. And you know, I appreciate that this comes down to finances at the end of the day, and unfortunately there isn't an endless supply, and we have to use the, you know, the money in the best way, and like you say, in as an equal way as possible, and trying to spread that out to as many families as possible. Just a couple of things on the report. It's sort of in 3.1, it talks about the sort of misuse of funds, but then it also says in the office, and then one of those misuses was funds paying for activities for the whole family, rather than just for the child with a disability. But then the offer says that primarily short breaks are aimed to give families with a disabled child a meaningful break. So I'm just kind of, they seem to contradict each other. And I understand if you sort of, I think I read further about if you were going to go to, I don't know, Legoland or something, it needs to be used just for that child and the carer. But then there is also that sort of ability for sort of parents to go away for a weekend or something and then use, you know, a respite care or a PA or something. So there just seemed a bit of conflict. I guess perhaps what you're saying is if there's other children, you can't use the fund to pay for childcare for the other child. But I'm just looking at that as a bit, and I've got personal experience of this, so I don't like to always bring my personal experience here, but I think it is relevant. And unfortunately, I can't use this fund anymore, sadly. So I think it's probably okay to speak about it. But I found when I was accessing short breaks that it was really quite bureaucratic. And for someone that you're trying to sort of prevent going into the next stage of getting much more care. It's what we're trying to do at the end of the day, isn't it? Prevent that. It kind of felt like, I can't face this. And I did have a few battles, I must admit, regarding it. And I just said, actually, keep it. I'll do a child in need assessment because I can't do this. And then there were some changes and we adapted to it, but possibly I was looking at this and thinking, gosh, I hope what we did, we did. We paid for our accommodation and then we paid privately for our child to get respite. Now, that looks like a misuse of funds in here, so I'll confess that now. And that's, what these changes are doing. But it helped because it meant I didn't have to go through all these loops, which I didn't have time to do and couldn't face doing, but we got the respite. So, and then just going on from that, I've got a few things, because like Joe said, I'm quite passionate about this, because I'm really keen to make sure that it does do what it says, and we don't get families going on to the next stage, and we keep these families together. So what was the other, I had one other thing. Oh yeah, it was with regards to using PAs for respite. So my concern is, and my experience is, if you get a maximum of £1,000, because that's the maximum you can get, when you get a PA come out and meet you, and they know that your funding is short breaks, they suddenly disappear. Because rightly so, they're only ever going to get £1,000 from you in a year. So for them to make a living, they're going to have 20-odd children to care for, to be able to, have this as a career, if you like. So I think that's a stumbling block. It's very difficult for families to get a PA to come and help look after their child. And I notice in the report, you can have a family member, but they can't be part of your household. Now, if you've got, where we do these days, we have extended family, adult children are living at home for much longer, they might be the best person to care for that child because they know their routine and they know their sibling really well. But why should a 20, 25-year-old take time off work to look after their sibling and not be paid to do so? But they might be the best person. So I'm just wondering if that can be looked at, or whether you'd consider that. Sorry, I know it was a bit long.
I'll just take the first point, Liz. I think if you'd like to spend some time with me sharing your experience of short breaks, then we can learn from an expert for experience to support us taking this further, along with the support that we get from Parent Carers Forum. So I'll leave that for you to contact me if that's an option for you.
Yeah, just picking up the wider point. So it's really interesting to hear your experience, and sorry it wasn't a sort of positive one beforehand. One of the things that we did get feedback was that there wasn't any transparency, so there wasn't any criteria. So the officers that were dealing with it had to kind of make their own judgment. That wasn't necessarily standardised across the piece, so we wanted to actually make it very clear as to what was in scope, what was out of scope. As you quite rightly point out, there are some real nuances to that, and we have built in an escalation route that says, actually, if you're not happy with that decision, it will escalate and it will come to me in the first instance, and if you're not happy with the decision from me, I think it goes to one of you two, I can't remember which one. Because we are aware that there will be some instances that don't necessarily neatly fit into a criteria, and we have to be aware of that. I think what we were finding was some small amounts of families would basically use it all in one go to go on a weekend away, which meant for the rest of the year there was no respite for that child, and actually there might be a family of 7 and that takes up the whole thing, whereas actually that grant is for an individual child. You might have multiple children in the household that can all get a grant, but actually that's the primary reason. So we did consult about that to look at what that looked like. And we wanted to also move out some of the things that were a bit more spurious. You know, we had things like, games consoles and, those sorts of things. They're not really short breaks in that sense. You want that family engagement. So I'm hoping that the criteria that we've developed now is as robust as we can without being too finite, but also having that escalation criteria means that we can look at those instances, like you say, that if you've got an older sibling at home and they are absolutely the best person to care, then yes, we can make those exceptions for that. So it's just getting a balance between kind of having a set criteria and trying to be open and transparent, but also allowing for those exceptional circumstances, because I'm sure there'll be some absolutely fantastic ideas people come forward to that don't necessarily fit into that criteria, but when we read them we'll go, actually that's absolutely brilliant. Of course that's going to benefit the whole family. So we've been very keen to keep that in.
Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I really only had one question, but another point to raise. Obviously, reading your report on page 144, you mentioned Stockton-on-Tees Council and also South Tyneside councils, which have £400 and £300 caps, where we don't, with the number going up towards 863. So making sure that is a decent sum on the grant. With both of them councils also facing challenges financially, which both are the ones that you've actually listed there, both being run by Labour administrations. My question was going to be on, with regards to, from an application coming in, if you had a person dealing with it, so they got it on day one and they were dealing with it, how long would it take to complete all the way through to awarding the grant in man hours or person hours, whatever you want to put it as, on that? So if we're looking at it, so if it came in an ideal world, if we didn't have any backlog from the start to the finish, how long on average would that take?
I wonder if we go to Lisa to ask her how long she would like it to take.
I was wondering how long the piece of string was. But
yeah, and it's a really good question, and I think until this is fully up and running as a process, I wouldn't want to say it's going to take 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it looks like. It will be a lot quicker than it is now, I can absolutely say that. And it'll depend what the bid's like as well. You know, if you're putting the application and there's missing information, it might take a little bit longer. If it's quite straightforward, it might be a lot quicker. But we're confident we can get to the point over the next few months where actually that backlog is gone, and I can come back to you and say, look, we think on average it's taking this amount of weeks from, as you say, somebody filling in the form, pressing the button, to money appearing on the card or in the account to be able to do that. And we're hoping to make renewals a lot more straightforward as well, because again, they're quite arduous at the moment and they don't need to be. If you've spent the money properly before and the circumstances of your child haven't changed, it should be a relatively straightforward process.
Just come back on that. Just looking at the forecast for 2024-25, it says 1,296 applications. And if each application took a person that was working, say 10 working days to do that, just dealing with that one application, and then looking at the numbers. So obviously you've looked at the numbers, so we haven't got enough people, but the people we've brought in, if the time's taken, and it would take basically them 40 hours to deal with each application, and you've making sure that we've got enough people in to deal with as it increases. So that's what you're looking at is that the people we've got in, are they sufficient to not only deal with the backlog, but also to get us up to date, or do we need to potentially look at more resources?
Yeah, so part of the review, we did try and model that, and as you can imagine, asking for additional staffing for this project in the current situation was difficult. So I had to get it past colleagues in finance over there who scrutinised me and said, actually, is this going to be enough? How efficient are they going to be? So we're as confident as we can be that the additional, I think, 1.6 FTE will give us enough to be a working team to actually keep up with demand. But as I say, it's always a case of getting it up and running in practice and doing it. But we absolutely had to model it because, you know, the business cases that go forward are scrutinised to the nth degree. So, yeah, we couldn't have got away with a bit of a finger in the air.
Thank you for that. Can I just say that applying for something like the household support grant is quite a user-friendly form. Have you worked with Lisa and Parent Forum? You know, because I know, you know, when a foster child beat me up, that you're in crisis right then and there. The last thing you want to do is fill in 10 pages or write War and Peace. So are we confident we're simplifying the necessary and eliminating the unnecessary and making Mariah happy as well?
Yeah, I think we've worked on it with Sarah, I have to say. We have worked on it with Sarah quite closely. I think we still have some work to do on some areas, which obviously Sarah knows that. But I do think, I know we were talking about looking at making it digital. So having a digital form, which I think is already done, and it's actually already on the website. So parents can now fill in a digital form. However, I think we now need to look at the other side of it, of creating that way of uploading their receipts so that they don't lose them in the middle of the process, or and show where they're working on that programme as well.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, James. And lastly, when I read the report, I absolutely adored from page 183, where you get those concrete, joyous, golden moments with the voice of our children and young people. So thank you for that. Right, Wayne, you've got 2 minutes.
Mine's going to be about 30 seconds. Can this system be abused, and if so, what measures do you put in place to prevent it?
We've got a whole host of check and balance measures in place already around, you know, which families are entitled, are they known to us, we check ID, all of those sorts of things. So they're reviewed on an annual basis, so we're as confident as we can be that the right people will be getting the right funds and that they're proportionate.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair.
So bear with this, is quite lengthy, but I move that the committee notes compliance with short breaks legislation in production of a short break services statement and significant improvements in how we interact and communicate with disabled children and their families. The committee notes the plans to increase availability of inclusive universal services through comprehensive training, workforce development and stakeholder engagement. Note the external investment into developing and expanding short break provision at ROCC and in the community. And we note the commitment to ensuring our provisions are appropriately resourced by filling the local offer position, acquiring new staff for the children's short break team, and 5 apprentices who will be being trained to work in children's residential settings. And we note the changes to the short break grant scheme and associated changes to internal process that will improve experiences and outcomes for our customers, as well as delivering savings of up to 200,000.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Mark. And agreed? And we're on to the last item on the agenda, the work programme. Stephanie.
As usual, I have nothing to add, but I'm happy to take any questions on anything on the report.
Any questions on the work plan? No, I think we're up to date. We've got everything covered.
I think there is an outstanding action on there, but I do have a response on one of them, so I'll get that out.
Right.
Of course you will, Councillor Perfect, always.
Right, well, thank you for your contributions this evening. Lovely to see a trio of youth and young people. First, whoops, so cold.
I move that we note the report and agree the work programme as set out in Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italics in Appendix 1.
Is that seconded? And agreed? And thank you, trio of young people. Thank you for keeping warm, and thank you for your contributions. Good night.